Are you ready to go, Elizabeth?
Amanda is recording for this one, but yeah, it sounds like she's ready.
Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and call this evening's Provo Municipal Council meeting to order on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021 at 5:31. This is a statement from Chairman Sewell, and I quote, "This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means. On January 7, 2021, in accordance with Utah's Open and Public Meetings Act, I have determined that conducting meetings of the Municipal Council with an anchor location such as the Municipal Council Chamber presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. These are the facts upon which I have made this determination. The World Health Organization has classified novel coronavirus, aka COVID-19, as a pandemic. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. Utah is currently subject to State Public Health Order 2020-27, which limits the size of public gatherings and which requires people to wear face coverings and follow social distancing guidelines. Utah County is currently listed as having a high level of coronavirus transmission, and physical distancing measures would be difficult to set up and maintain in the Provo City Municipal Council Chamber and other meeting rooms. Additionally, the chair of the governing board of the redevelopment agency of Provo City, Shannon Ellsworth, has determined that its meetings are subject to the same risks and has adopted the same procedures as the municipal council. The meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at youtube.com/Provo City Council. As a reminder, the council requests that attendees help maintain the decorum of the meeting by silencing electronic devices and being respectful to others. Please wait to speak until called on by the council chair, or in the case of this evening, myself as the vice chair. In the current situation where the meeting is being held via Zoom webinar and broadcast over YouTube, I remind you to turn off your mics when not speaking, so as to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. Okay, so go ahead and roll call the members of the council. We have myself, Vice Chair David Shipley is here, Chair David Sewell is present. Councilors Ellsworth, Fillmore, Hoban, Hanley, and Harding are also all present. We welcome the mayor tonight, as well as other staff that will be helping with the various presentations, and appreciate you all being here as well. We'll begin the meeting by an opening prayer given by Chair David Sewell, and then after that, I will give the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Chair Sewell.
Thank you. Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful to be able to meet together in this council meeting tonight. Grateful for our city and its citizens and the many people who serve the city's interests in various ways. We're grateful for our administration, for our many city employees, and grateful for the many people who volunteer their time in various ways to help us build a better community. We're mindful that the decisions we make are sometimes difficult, and pray for wisdom and understanding of the various facets of the issues that we'll discuss, that we'll be able to make good decisions for the benefit of the city and for the benefit of the people who are affected by our decisions. We're grateful for our country and pray especially for a blessing of protection from the pandemic that's ravaging our country and the world, and pray that I'll bless all involved in developing, distributing, and administering vaccines, that this work will go on as efficiently and effectively as possible. We're grateful for the opportunity to serve in this way and pray for thy guidance to be with us. In the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, our first item for this evening is a presentation of the accreditation for the Provo Parks and Recreation Department. And it'll be introduced by Leanne Powell, Executive Director of the Utah Recreation and Parks Association, and Mr. John Bradley, President of the Utah Recreation and Parks. We'll turn time over to you both.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. Are you thumbs up? Are you able to hear me okay? Excellent. So really appreciate the opportunity to come before you for just a couple minutes and help honor your Parks and Recreation Department, Scott Henderson and all of his staff for receiving CAPRA accreditation for the Provo City Parks and Recreation Department. So as you mentioned, I am the Executive Director of the Utah Recreation and Parks Association. So we represent about 1,400 members statewide. One of our main goals as an association is to really elevate our profession and focus on some of society's big questions like health and wellness and equity and conservation. And as we, as an association, really try to look at how can we address some of these major issues. One of the things we're really excited about is the opportunity for some of our agencies to become CAPRA accredited. And as I'm sure you learned in the work session, the CAPRA accreditation is a grueling process. Probably took at least a full year to go through the process. Our National Recreation and Parks Association has established 154 national standards that and benchmarks for reaching those standards that anybody looking for CAPRA accreditation has to meet. And just to kind of give you an overall sense of what it takes, this accreditation was established in 1993. So 28 years it's been available. And currently in the United States, there's 180 agencies that have met the accreditation process. That's out of over 10,000 agencies running parks and recreation programs throughout the United States. So really this accreditation process places Provo in the top 0.5% nationally of parks and recreation organizations. So when we look at what does that mean? So your Parks and Recreation Department is definitely leading the state and leading the nation in providing parks and recreation opportunities for your community. They are meeting best practices in over 154 facets of everything that they do. So really just incredible the amount of things that they are doing well. And I think it also speaks to the city council and the administration that you are absolutely committed to excellence in serving your community. So I just, on behalf of the URPA, would like to thank Scott Henderson and his staff for taking on the challenge of going through this accreditation process, of being successful in getting that CAPRA accreditation, and really just leading our state. They really do. You look at anything we offer in the state through URPA, and I can assure you that Provo City is one of the leaders in doing all of the right things and just a positive influence statewide. So I am proud of Scott and his staff and all of the great things they've done, and we're excited to be here to honor them. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to John Bradley, our president of URPA, and let him talk a little bit about some of the specifics and things, how this process has really brought their staff together and some of the specific things that Provo City is doing.
Excellent. Thank you, Leanne. Pleasure to be with you, Mayor and City Council. I actually just worked down the road not too far in Santaquin, and I'm pleased to represent URPA as the president this year. We want to just note a few of the accomplishments of your Parks and Recreation Department that you're well aware of. One being your very diverse facilities. One of the top rec centers, you could argue, in the nation. I've seen many of them. An Olympic venue, your golf, nice golf course that you're doing some renovations now, and art facility and so forth. So wonderful facilities. Your outdoor trails and parks are very dynamic and very unique. We're also very impressed, as Leanne mentioned, with how Provo leads the state in innovation and in performance with its staff. You have wonderful, top-notch staff members. We know many of them and get to work with them in meetings and conferences, and just very impressed with Scott and the whole crew. Also, as a city council and mayor, I'm sure you guys appreciate the financial freedom that comes from Parks and Rec facilities that do as well as they do. It's truly unheard of to have facilities that are so close to self-sufficiency or self-sufficient as they are. I think that's, again, setting a standard for the other departments in the state and in the region. Another thing that I've recently understand is, along with administration of department and pandemic and all the other duties, that Scott is also a project coordinator with your city hall. I think that's wonderful, using those abilities. I don't think you need to worry about him being not busy enough. It sounds great that he's able to help your city in such a way. And that attitude of working with other departments definitely is sound for all of Parks and Recreation for Provo. And then again, just again, how unique of a department that you have. Just want to congratulate you in behalf of URPA and even our national NRPA. Want to go ahead and present this award to Scott Henderson and congratulate all of your city and Parks and Recreation department. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words, Leanne and John. I will pass on this recognition to our entire team, because every single one of them had a part in this. But it was mentioned earlier, but none of this would be possible without our citizens and support from our mayor and council. So really do appreciate this opportunity to celebrate this, because a lot of hard work went into it, and we thank you for everything.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Leanne, and congratulations to the Parks and Rec Department on this accreditation, and also specifically to Scott and your whole team. Congratulations. That's a big deal. We're proud of you and excited to have you here in Provo. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the public comment portion of our meeting. Karen Tapahi with Community Relations. She's the coordinator for our council department. She'll go ahead and give us some instruction.
There are 3 types of items for which public comment will be received. The first is the open public comment period. The council will allow up to 15 minutes for public comments on matters that do not appear on tonight's agenda. The second is for items that require a public hearing. For these items, time will be provided for all those who wish to speak. The third is for items on the agenda that do not require a public hearing. The council will allow up to 15 minutes for comments on each item. Because the city council is meeting virtually using Zoom webinar, and this meeting is being broadcast on the Provo City Council's YouTube channel, we have enabled telephone access to receive public comment, the numbers for which will be shown on screen during the meeting. When a caller is connected, they will be required to enter the meeting ID and enter the pound or hashtag symbol. When asked for a personal ID number, enter pound. The caller will now enter the meeting as an attendee and will be able to hear the meeting while muted. Similarly, tonight we have enabled access for persons wanting to connect via the computer to this Zoom meeting. As attendees, you can raise your hand electronically at the appropriate times to comment when called upon. For telephone callers, When you wish to speak on the item being discussed, press star 9 to raise your hand and then wait to be called upon. When we call on you, press star 6 to unmute yourself. Attendees will be called upon by the last 4 digits of the listed phone number or by the name listed. Please provide your name and city of residence before making your comments. You'll be given up to 2 minutes to speak. A timer will be posted on screen and a beep should be audible when your time is up. Just a reminder, there is a lag of about 30 to 60 seconds between the meeting that's live and the broadcast. To avoid confusion, callers should mute the broadcast and listen to the discussion in real time. The open public comment period starts now. And we do already have one person with their hand up. Sorry, I've got 3 screens and my mouse is not cooperating. Okay, so caller with the number ending in 7433, go ahead and make your comment. You have 2 minutes. Make sure you list or state your name and city of residence. You should be getting a prompt. There you go.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. My name's Jonah Johnson. I am a resident of Provo, Utah, and I just have a quick question about the sports complex that's wanting to be built by Provo. I saw in the news that there were a few sports that they were interested in, such like rugby and those kind of areas. Does the city plan to build any pickleball courts? I mean, pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the nation currently. You see places like Las Vegas, where they've spent millions and millions just on pickleball complexes, Florida as well. Does the city plan on building that as part of their sports complex, or are they just trying to stick to the other sports that aren't as growing in the nation currently? That's just my question.
Normally, it's not a question and answer format, but I'm sure we can get
is it not?
answer. Right. It's just you give your comments, but I'm sure we can find an answer for you. We'll move on to the next callers, but we'll see if we can have someone answer it by the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, looks like, let's see. So the next one is Joseph Addington. Go ahead and state your name and city of residence, and then you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hello, City Council. My name's Joseph Addington. I am a resident of Provo, and I'm a volunteer for Utah Approves, which is an election reform organization. I know the city of Provo has taken election reform seriously, so I'm here to request the city's support in an important matter regarding that. Our representative here in Provo, Adam Robertson, has presented a bill in the Utah House of Representatives that would allow cities to choose to use approval voting in their elections. Approval voting is a very simple reform that results in a lot fairer and more representative elections and doesn't require changing the form of ballots or acquiring new voting machines or software. The bill doesn't force any changes on voting, but gives cities the option to do so if they would like. So I would like to ask the city to make a statement to the House of Representatives in support of our representative and his bill, which is HB 174, and to consider adopting approval voting for Provo city elections. This is a great opportunity for Provo to continue being an early adopter of important reforms and to support better self-government in cities all over Utah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Addington. So, Mr. Hoban, go ahead. You had an answer to the question about pickleball?
Yeah, currently being built at Rotary Park in Grandview. I believe it's 8 courts will be added, 6 or 8, I can't remember. Yeah, so we'll be adding those there. Should be finishing up by the spring.
Right.
They're reformatting several or refinishing several tennis courts, adding some parking, and adding pickleball.
Thank you. That's up by Westridge Elementary, correct? Yeah.
Right. Yep. Just adjacent to it.
Okay. Does anyone else desire to make a public comment? I don't see any other hands raised. So hit *9 if you're on the phone, or, oh, there we go. Jefferson Lambert. Go ahead and state your name and city of residence. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Jefferson Lambert, also a resident of Provo currently, but originally from Logan, Utah. Today I'm not calling in to address any specific items, rather to introduce myself and just say that I am looking to be more involved in local politics, and that's why I'm here listening to the council, and I would appreciate to hear back from you with any opportunities to serve in Provo City. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. I don't see any other raised hands. So Mr. Shipley, I believe we're safe to move along.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate your help with that, and appreciate the comments. Those that are willing to make comments in a meeting like this. The next item of business is to approve the minutes from the following meetings: September 15th, 2020 council meeting, November 10th, 2020 council meeting, and December 15th, 2020 council meeting. Are there any objections or requested changes to those meeting minutes? Seeing no objections, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. So our first implied motion on the action agenda tonight is a resolution transferring $614,197 from the general fund to the airport fund for marketing and an interfund loan payment to the energy fund, and appropriating $124,144 in the airport fund. If any members of the public would like to give a comment for this item, they are encouraged to call in or sign in now. Calling and Zoom audio instructions can be found on agendas.provo.org, the council blog, and the current YouTube stream of this meeting. This item will be presented by Mr. John Borgett, Director of Administrative Services.
Thank you, Vice Chair Shipley and the Honorable Council. I would just mention first that this item was discussed on the work session on January 19, 2021 with the Council. This has, as Council Vice Chair Shipley has mentioned, this has 2 components. The first is a $100,000 component related to the airport and Allegiant. I'll just read this. It says Provo City has agreed to contribute $50,000 in marketing costs for each new destination Allegiant flies to from the Provo Airport. Allegiant has recently announced Denver and Orange County as new destinations, requiring a $100,000 contribution from the city to Allegiant for marketing purposes. This will be funded with a $100,000 transfer from the general fund. I would just mention that as Allegiant is successful with their flights, and as we are expanding and developing the airport, it's a win-win scenario for the airport as well as for Allegiant, and so we feel like we're a partner with them, and that's why we have made this agreement. The second component was on April 21st, 2020, a little less than a year ago, the council approved a resolution authorizing an interfund loan between the airport fund and the energy fund for $4,900,526 to purchase strategic land near the airport. The loan is for 10 years with a fixed principal payment of $490,053 and a variable rate equal to the monthly Utah State Public Treasurer's Investment Fund. The loan was to be paid back with airport revenues, and if were not sufficient, a transfer will be made from the general fund for all or a portion of the payment. Currently, in our fiscal 21 budget that we're in, the airport is being subsidized by the general fund and is not in a position to make all or a portion of the payment. And so we're recommending that we transfer $514,197, which includes interest component of $24,144. I would mention that The administration is optimistic and excited about the airport. We recently have the footings and foundation for the new terminal that's under construction. We're hopeful and optimistic that in coming years, and it will likely be a couple of years out, that as we bring in additional scheduled service flights and we start getting the benefits of the airport, of the new terminal, that the airport will be able to provide all or a portion of this payment. I would also mention that as we're working on the fiscal 22 budget, the plan is to include this transfer as part of the budget so that we include that in as we balance the budget and work through those numbers. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Harding?
Thank you, Vice Chair Shipley. I apologize. I have have a really bad memory. But did we not have flights from the Provo Airport to Denver previously, and maybe even to Orange County previously? And I apologize for not asking this in the work meeting a couple of weeks ago. It just occurred to me that, you know, are we redoing routes?
I know with a prior carrier, we had flights that went to Denver, but I believe, and I don't know if Steve's on the call, but I believe that we have not had with Allegiant flights to Denver until this flight was announced. As far as the question related to Orange County, I'm not sure. Do we know if Steve Gleason is on the call, is available?
Mr. Parker, could you answer for us, please?
I can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did have Frontier Airlines flew the very first passenger flights to Denver. It's been 6, 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, when that happened. And as you may recall, they made a change in their aircraft fleet and eliminated their smaller aircraft, which were flying out of Provo to Denver and back. The route had been relatively successful, but again, it was largely focused on business travelers predominantly. When they left, we were able to recruit Allegiant to come in and fill some of that passenger demand. And so it is a new flight for Allegiant to Denver, and therefore that marketing agreement we've had with them would stick. And they have not ever flown to John Wayne Airport from Provo. So this is a brand new location.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions before we open it to public comment? So we'll open it to public comment now. If you're on the call or part of the Zoom session, you'll need to do *9 to raise your hand so we know that you'd like to make a comment. I don't see anybody raising their hand yet, but we probably should wait just a second.
I think you're safe to move along now.
Thank you, Karen. Discussion from the council on this item. So seeing no discussion, I guess we're just pulling it up. Councilor Ellsworth, please.
Yeah, Mr. Harding brings up a good point. Let's say Allegiant is flying to Denver now, and then they decide not to fly to Denver in 3 years, and then in 6 years they decide to fly to Denver. Do we still pay for that promotion at that point again?
No, it's my understanding that that this is only for net new destinations that Allegiant is attempting to grow for the first time. Interestingly enough, just as a sidelight, we were on a call yesterday with the Mesa Airport talking about a variety of issues, and they actually have 45 destinations from Mesa with the Legion only, flying to other locations. So again, I guess we could be victims of our own success and be spending a lot of money on this over many years. But at least for now, the idea was to try to again grow the base of passenger opportunities to fly in and out of Provo.
And Mr. Parker, my understanding was this was a non-written agreement with specifically Allegiant. Is that correct?
That's correct. And although we did actually invest quite a bit more than $50,000 when Frontier came to town to fly to Denver. And so I think, as Mr. Gleason indicated last week, almost any airline that starts flying out of Provo to a new destination will be looking for some kind of community support to help them kind of get, pun intended, to get off the ground in Provo. So,
other comments or questions from the council? Okay, I don't see any. Let's go ahead and call for a vote on the implied motion. So a yes or no, Chair Sewell.
Yes.
So I, Vice Chair Shipley, will vote yes. Councillor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Councillor Fillmore.
Yes.
Councillor Hoban.
Yes.
Councillor Hanley.
Yes.
And Councillor Harding.
Yes.
So that was a unanimous vote in favor of the implied motion, with Councillor Sewell, Shipley, Ellsworth, Fillmore, Hoban, Hanley, and Harding voting yes for it. Okay, next item is an implied motion. It's item 3, a resolution approving a substantial amendment to the program year 2019 annual action plan incorporating additional funds for COVID-19 public health response. If any members of the public would like to give a comment for this item, they're encouraged to call in right now. And this will be presented by Mr. Dan Gonzalez.
Hello, thank you. Can you all hear me? Get a thumbs up on that. Very good. So, you may remember about 6 months ago, or a little over 6 months ago, we came with information that the Department of Housing and Urban Development had made an allocation to the city to provide funding specifically to assist with a response to the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. At the time, $745,000 and change, almost 747, were allocated. There have been 2 other allocations. The second one was exclusively to the states, so Provo didn't get anything on that. But the third one, Provo City again, was allocated an amount. It's $487,563. And throughout outreach to public service agencies and other interested individuals, in collaboration with Utah County, which was administered by Mountain Land Association of Governments, and the city of Orem, we received applications for several projects. The ones that you see on the screen there are what we received. And Provo City is funding only 3 of those public services, plus dedicating additional dollars to other projects that were included with the first allocation. The first item that Provo City would be undertaking is replacing the cooler for the food bank community action services. Because of the increased demand, they have needed to increase their capacity to serve residents of Provo and others. The second item that you see, coming back to the food bank, the request and the allocation is for $27,600. The next one is to Rocky Mountain University of Health Professionals. All 3 of the entitlements have been assisting the physical therapy rehab clinic they have. And again, based on circumstances with the pandemic, they've requested some assistance to provide a better way to continue providing the rehabilitation needed in a safe environment, so they can reduce the possibility of contamination or trace contact for the pandemic. And the request is for $84,000 on that. The last one that we're assisting for public services cases is to the Provo City Housing Authority, or actually Utah Regional Housing, which is the nonprofit for Provo City Housing Authority. As you may remember, they have gained control over two properties, Skyland and Bonneville Apartments, where they provide assistance to homeless individuals. And the $25,000 they're requesting are for establishing safety standards, cleaning up, making sure that the units are clean, that there's enough supplies available for them. And for those two properties, they're requesting $25,000. The last three items that you see there are continuing for the projects that we have been were funded also with the last allocation, providing mortgage assistance, an additional $36,000, rental assistance, $45,000, and small business assistance, $171,000. So that brings the total. I guess I should point out, you see the total is $390,000 for active projects. The balance of that has been set aside for administration, and we're just taking the typical 20% that we could use for these. Now that is not to say that we're actually using all of that administration. We just set it aside to make sure that we have enough funding for that. We continue to evaluate what we're spending on that, or where we have obligated for it. And if any funding is available, we'll look for other worthy projects that could use the funding instead. So that's the extent of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Questions from the council before we open it up for public hearing? And again, to the public, if you have a question on this, go ahead and get ready, call in, raise your hand so we're ready to call on you once we're done with some questions. So any questions from the council first? Well, Mr. Gonzalez, that must have been a good explanation. Thank you. What about questions now? Let's open it up to the public. Any questions from the public on this item or comments? I don't see any hands raised, but Karen, should we give it a minute or so?
Give it just about 20 more seconds. That should do it. I don't see anyone raising a hand or coming in new, so we can move on.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and bring it back to the council for discussion. Councilor Ellsworth, please.
Yes, I was wondering if you could give me some more information, and maybe you addressed this and I just missed the title, but on page 21 on table 6, there's a substantial amendment and it's titled Other. And I noticed that compared to the CDBG and the home programs, this one is mostly about administration. It's not for acquisition or home buyers or construction. Can you just tell me about the difference between these two? Or I guess the three?
So when you say page 21, you're referring to the action plan, correct?
Yes.
Okay, let me just get to there. Just 1 second. Okay. Right. So we've amended the plan. This other row is exclusively to include the let's see, the COVID funding. It's called CDBG-CV funds, and we cover all the categories just because we want to make sure that we have everything that could be possibly available before we even receive requests for the funding. But as the funding has been received, the categories we'll be using is public services and economic development. I should mention that when we do the mortgage assistance and the rental assistance, it will also be under the public services side, is the only avenue we have to provide, I forget the exact term, but actually provide funding or monies to beneficiaries. The funding does not go directly to the beneficiary, it's paid to those that are providing the service, either the mortgage company or the landlords. Subsistence payments, that's what it was, subsistence payments. So, I'm sorry, did I address the question you had?
Yeah, I was just curious if this was going wholly to grant administration or if it was going actually to a specific need in the community.
So that's what Exhibit B shows, how we're using it. $390,000. So it's what you see on the screen here in the Zoom. For this second allocation, which is $1,000, we are setting aside the 20% of it for which is about $97,000. You see it right here in this section. I don't know if you can see my pointer.
Yeah, I can see it now. Thank you.
So that's what's going to administration, and then on this far hand right side is the projects that we're actually assisting. I should point out that these other projects that don't have a number in the CV3 recommendation are being covered by one of the other collaborators' entitlement. So the Seat of Orem is doing Boys and Girls Club, and Utah County is covering Central Hispano and so forth.
Thank you. Other questions or follow-up? So this is an implied motion to approve this. Any questions before we go to a vote? Okay, I don't see questions. So here's the resolution we've just put up on the screen. I'll go ahead and roll call for the vote. Chair Sewell.
Yes.
I will vote yes. Dave Shipley votes yes. Councillor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Councillor Fillmore.
Yes.
Councillor Hoban.
Yes, there was a comment by Councillor Harding if we got public comment on this.
Checked with Karen and waited, but happy to open it back up if there are comments that need to be made.
Okay, I vote yes.
Councillor Hanley.
Yes. Yes.
And Councillor Harding.
Yes.
And Karen, just double check for me because maybe I forgot, but we did open it to public comment, correct?
We did, and there wasn't anyone, and I didn't see any hands go up after the fact either. We're good.
Thank you. Thank you for confirming that. Okay, so that was a unanimous vote in favor of the implied motion by all councilors. Okay, so action item number 4 is a resolution of intent to create a permit parking area on portions of 820 North from 1025 East to 900 East, the Foothills Neighborhood. And I would remind you that if any members of the public would like to make a comment, go ahead and call in and sign in now to get ready for that. This item will be presented by City Planner Javin Weaver. Mr. Weaver.
Thanks. John, I just emailed you my presentation. I don't know if you got that or not. If not, I can share my screen. If you have a preference. Perfect. All right. Next slide, please. So the overview of this presentation will be the applicant's proposal, some facts, staff recommendation, and answer any questions that you may have. Next slide. Brennan Barfus was the applicant for this proposal, and it was for an expansion within the currently existing University Gardens North Foothill permit area within the Foothill neighborhood. On the screen, the blue shaded tone is the existing permit area. Next slide. This is showing where the current permit area is with the proposed expansion. Next slide. The proposed expansion of the University Gardens North Foothill permit area along 820 North is between 900 East and 1025 East. Nantucket Condos is nearby within this permit area study. They have 26 units, all one bedroom with one parking stall, located on the corner of 9th East and 820 North. Next slide. The applicant's proposal was to expand the existing University Gardens North Foothill permit along 800 North. It would have the same regulations as the existing permit. This would be for both sides of the street, the north and south side of the street. Next slide. Goals from the applicant are to preserve on-street parking for those who live within the neighborhood and to prevent abandoned vehicles from remaining stationary on the street. Next slide. Some facts for you. Within the area of study, there are 5 single-family homes and 26 condos. 9 of these units have renter dwelling licenses. Those are shaded in the purple tone. The condos, when the condos were approved back in 1987, there were 37 parking stalls on the site plan. Currently, when I went and counted it, there were only 31 parking stalls at the complex, with 7 of those being utilized as visitor parking. Within the current permit area, there's only 3 homes within the blue area. Only one of them has obtained parking permits for this area. The other 2 have opted not to. Staff measured how many legal parking spaces would be within the proposed expansion and found that there are only 48 legal parking spaces. Vehicles are only occupying the street on a 72% average. I apologize, 78% average. This is based on a 24-hour average. 800 North has an average of 78%. 820 North has an average of 78%. At 6 a.m., there's an average at 79%. The townhomes have an average utilization of 54%, but at 6 a.m., they're at 63%. There's one single-family house that was looked at. It's on the north side of the 820 North. It had a utilization rate of 100% at all hours, and average and at 6 a.m. The cost of the $15 cost of the proposed permit does not cover the cost to administer and enforce. If council wants to add additional parking permit areas, expansions, additional staff will be needed to manage and enforce efficiently. Next slide. Staff recommends managing on-street parking by continuing to enforce the 72-hour parking restriction and to continue to monitor parking concerns within the neighborhood. The data that was collected illustrates that there is still plenty of on-street parking available within the corridor. If the proposed area was added to the existing permit area, then potentially you would have 116 permits could be added. This is based on all the 5 single-family homes and 26 apartments. They could each be eligible potentially for 4 permits. So therefore, you'd have 116 permits could be added to this area. 41 off-street parking stalls are there, and 48 on-street parking stalls are there, which there essentially is a deficient of 27 vehicles that could park within this permit area. So therefore, you could be adding more vehicles within this neighborhood potentially. With that said, there's still plenty of on-street parking available within the neighborhood at every hour that this data was collected. Staff recommends to not vest the University Gardens Foothill permit expansion. Staff has reached out to the applicant and he replied saying that he is, quote, not against the suggested action, end quote, from staff. If council desires to move forward with University Gardens North Foothill expansion, the details of the permit language will need to be drafted and brought back to you for your review and enactment at a later date. Are there any questions for staff?
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Any questions? Mr. Handley.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Mr. Weaver, for this information. You've done a great job on this, and I believe Austin may have had some involvement with this earlier as well. This is somewhat unrelated to this particular proposal, but the $15 fee you mentioned doesn't cover the cost, and I feel like that's been mentioned a few times now, and I'm wondering if that's not the right fee. If maybe not for this particular project, because I don't think you've found compelling reason to have it here. But if there were a desirable location for a permit program and the $15 isn't covering it, and staff is at capacity, maybe it's time we think about a higher fee.
Thank you. The data that Austin had, some information regarding that, showed a much higher fee to cost or to administer and install a new permit, et cetera, within the neighborhoods. Much higher fee than the $15 that we currently have.
Thank you. Other questions before we open it to public comment? And again, just a reminder, if you have a comment, to notify us by pushing *9.
If I may say really quick, I've only heard from the applicant. I have not heard from any neighbors within this area, nor the neighborhood chair regarding this.
But again, to clarify, staff recommendation is to decline this with the idea that there is sufficient, based on your results, there is sufficient parking in this area.
Correct.
Why don't we go ahead and open it to public comment then? We'll wait just a few minutes here and double check, make sure we don't have anybody that would like to comment on this. I don't see any hands raised.
I can tell you that the Foothills Neighborhood Chair did get out information after we posted the agenda. So hopefully those who are interested in speaking will have had that chance. No hands raised at this moment, though.
While we wait for public comment, Mr. Handley.
Well, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but my impression was that the neighborhood chair was supportive of, having us look into this, but I don't think there was any sort of strong urgency from her about the need for this. I think she was interested to find out what staff found out. And so I would assume that means that there's not very strong feeling one way or the other.
Thank you. And again, this is an implied motion to create a permit program. Are there any substitute motions or any other suggestions before we move to a vote? Councilor Ellsworth?
Yeah, this street 820 North is the boundary between my district and Mr. Handley's district, and I've gotten no feedback, negative or positive, on this parking permit program expansion. Right now, I don't think that it's a game changer, and I would like to defer to staff's recommendation, which would be to deny the expansion of this parking permit program.
Thank you, Mr. Harding.
Thank you. This one is a bit odd, but I agree that if the particularly like if the applicant is comfortable not moving forward, then I don't see any point in us doing it. I'm looking at this though, and I mean, it seems like it's a fairly large permit area that's already in place there, and we're talking about a very small incremental, growth of this that almost seems like, I'm not sure why this was not included when when the area was originally set up. I mean, this would extend it just a very small amount. I fully understand that our enforcement is kind of at the limit, but this is like just finishing driving down the street kind of thing. So, and then broadly, I am very supportive as we move forward of charging fees that cover the cost of administering the program. I think that's just, should be a given. But with that said, with this whole area all being charged the $15 a permit, I don't necessarily see that it makes sense to charge something different if this were to be expanded. So again, I look at this and I don't, to borrow Councilor Ellsworth's comments, I don't think this is a game changer either way. So I don't see much harm in expanding it. But if the applicant themselves is not interested in proceeding, then I support not moving it on tonight.
Other comments, Councilor Ellsworth.
I was just going to make a motion that we deny this parking permit program extension.
So do we need a motion to deny it, or do we just vote against it, the implied motion?
Oh.
This is a question.
That would be the one. You'd call for a vote on the implied motion and just not
vote no. Yeah.
Okay.
Chair Sewell.
Just one comment. It seems like a common theme on some of these requests is, we don't have the enforcement resources, and the cost isn't enough to fund it. And I'm just interested if we could move toward a more flexible paradigm that would be revenue neutral and self-funding. I think in a lot of these areas where programs have been proposed, we could probably come up with something that would be really helpful if we weren't so limited in the current paradigm that we have for parking permit programs.
Thank you. Other comments? I don't see other hands raised, so why don't we call a vote on the implied motion for the resolution, and we'll start with Chair Sewell.
No.
And Councilor Shipley will vote no. Councilor Ellsworth?
No.
Councilor Fillmore?
No.
Councilor Hoban?
No.
Councilor Hanley?
No.
Councilor Harding?
No.
So it's unanimous as a decline to creation of a permit parking program. Okay, the next item is an ordinance, an implied motion for the ordinance amending Provo City Code Chapter 6.32. It has citywide application. Again, if the public would like to comment, go ahead and call and sign in now. And this also is presented by Mr. Javin Weaver, planner for the city. Mr. Weaver.
Thank you. Just wait for John to pull up the PowerPoint. All right, so next slide. Thanks. So the overview of this presentation will be going over some state code changes, proposed language changes within our current code, and answer some questions. And I also have Jesse Antonino here.
Hi, I'm Jessie Antonino. I'm the business license administrator, and I'm recommending some improvements to the mobile food business ordinance. And Javin will be able to present this for us.
Sorry, guys, we lost them for just a second.
My own. Okay. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties. Apologize about that. So one thing with the state code, if a mobile food business was to come to Provo, if they have a license from any municipality, and the city recognizes that, we won't require them to have one from Provo if they're going to be here doing business in Provo. We recognize any license within the state. Next slide. Oh, I can't. So in looking at our state and looking at our code, some of the definitions that we sought to add that would benefit the city would be to add a mobile food court and to add a mobile food court promoter. Next slide, please. The zones to add this, to update this within our own ordinance code is to add the open space preservation recreation zone. Also, we're adding in that no alcohol sales shall be provided or shall be sold from a mobile food vendor. Additionally, to remind mobile food vendors that to keep the sidewalk clear of obstructions and also the public right of way. Next slide. This is also to remind mobile food vendors, mobile food court promoters that they do need to obtain a business license here within the city. Next slide. With some of the state code changes, we can no longer regulate how long a mobile food business is on private property. We can't, with the length of time. We can regulate it with public property, and so that's what this is showing. Next slide. This is saying if a mobile food vendor decides to have a canopy, that they do need to have a obtain a tent permit from the fire department prior to this. Next slide. If a mobile food vendor decides to have a temporary use accessory structure, then they do need to get a building permit if it is larger than 200 square feet. As well, they need to display their license, and if they're located on private property, that they shall not establish themselves as a permanent structure. Next slide. And last, this is to update our sign code within our mobile food vendors, so that way it's more aligned with our First Amendment rights for what we regulate for language. Are there any questions for staff?
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Any questions? I don't see any hands up. Sorry, Mr. Weaver, did you have something?
Was I muted the whole time?
No, we could hear you.
Okay, I was muted on Robert's computer, and I just realized there's luckily the other microphone in here.
We heard you. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll remind the public that we'll open it for public comment here in just a second. But any questions for Mr. Weaver before we do that? Okay, let's go ahead and open it for public comment. Karen, I'll defer to you. How long we need to wait and whether or not we have participants. So this is an implied motion that we'll be voting on. We'll open it back to council discussion. Let's go ahead and open it to council discussion, and then if we do have an attendee that has something, we'll go back to that. Any comments before we vote? Okay, seeing none. Karen, are we okay to continue on the public comment side?
Sorry, I was having difficulty unmuting there. No one has shown a raised hand, so I believe we're good to move forward.
Okay. And one final call for any discussion from the council before the vote. All right. So, Chair Sewell.
Yes.
I will vote yes. Councillor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Councillor Fillmore.
Yes.
Councillor Hoban.
Yes.
Councillor Hanley.
Yes.
And Councillor Harding.
Yes.
So that's unanimous in favor of the ordinance. It passes on to the next. So the next item of business is an ordinance amending Provo City Code Titles 9, 14, and 15 to make various technical updates and corrections. It has a citywide application. Again, if members of the public would like to comment, we encourage them to call and log and sign in right now. This will be presented by Aaron Ardmore, City Planner. Mr. Ardmore. Mr. Ardmore.
Council Chair, because we had some technical difficulties over here, Mr. Ardmore is setting up in our other conference room. He'll be on in just 1 second, so sorry about that.
No worries. He's got the next two items. I was going to skip ahead. but I think we better stay on schedule, so we'll wait for him to get set up.
Yeah, it should just be a couple more minutes. Sorry.
That's okay. You have something prepared to sing for us, Mr. Mills?
We're just so glad that you guys are here, and this is one of those technology experiences, right?
All have them.
Rather than having complete silence, I'll just remind people that if they are on the line or on the computer, please raise your hand if you wish to speak on this item. It's never too early to raise your hand. and then again, if you're going to comment on some of the upcoming items, it's always good to get a head start. As you can see, technology can be interesting some days. So feel free to get on ahead of time and then listen as much as you can through your phone or your computer device. Then you get the real-time version of the meeting rather than the delayed version that comes through on YouTube or Facebook.
Thank you, Karen.
Darn, I was hoping that would be enough.
The timing would line up perfectly.
Well, we try. Oh, here we go. Sorry. As I was talking, I was not promoting them into the meeting, so yeah, should be here.
I think he should be coming in now.
Is this it right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Mind if I sit down beside you?
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Ardmore.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so we will go through. John, if you can go ahead and advance the slides. The first thing I want to call out is on the first amendment here in 1421C030. In corresponding with Councillor Harding and Brian Jones this afternoon and this evening, there's a suggested change to this, and staff has reviewed that and is totally comfortable with that suggested change of keeping an exception in that part of the chapter. Other than that, everything is the same as you saw it this morning. Most of these are updates to remove repealed zones and include zones that have been added into Title 14 in the last year. If we could advance More of the same here through different chapters in Title 14, updating the zones. As I said today in study session, Title 9 here was initially just to remove these R3, R4, R5 zones, but the fire marshal indicated that he wanted to include this language in red to match their standards for transport routes. So we've added that to comply with his code. Go ahead and continue. And this again is updating zones, and 1414E080 is just a correction, so we can reference the correct design guidelines for that zone. Go one more. And then the parking space definition in Title 14, Chapter 6 had this compact dimension size for a compact parking space, which is not in our design regulations in 1437. So we're just proposing to strike that to make that consistent with 1437. And then 1421.60, there was confusion with this first sentence. This is for an SC3 zone allowing mixed-use development. It was never intended for this to read as you could do a standalone residential use in SC3, so we're just making that clear by removing that sentence. So if you have any other questions for me, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Okay. I don't see any. Let's go ahead and open it for public comment. If anybody from the public would like to comment on this item, go ahead and push *9 so that we know you would like to. Give it just a little bit. I think we've noticed this item, that it was coming enough and waited for it enough to assume that the public doesn't have a comment on this. Karen, are you okay with that?
Yes, I believe the people who are on the line are for a future item, so go ahead.
Well, and again, I'm happy to reopen it for public comment if somebody raises their hand as we go through, questions and comments from the council as well. So any questions, specific questions? We did review this and ask questions earlier in the work session, but is there anything further that somebody would like to comment during this session? Mr. Harding.
First, let me just say that I really appreciate this effort and just the conscientiousness of our planning staff to proactively, try to track down these broken references and things like that. And I really appreciate their efforts in keeping our code clean. And it's a pleasure to work with Aaron on looking into some of this language. Maybe Mr. Jones, is the implied motion referencing the original wording or the changes that we talked about?
At this point in time, following using our normal protocol, the implied motion would actually be referring to the exhibit that was in your materials, which did not have this change. So I would recommend a motion to substitute this version of the ordinance for the previous version with regards to the implied motion.
And I see, I see something on the screen, and that's okay. That makes I think that's great. I'm happy to make a motion that we substitute this exhibit in for into the implied motion. Would it be helpful, or do you think would you be willing to just describe what the change is and what
Sure.
it says?
Sure. So if you look at what's in front of you with 1421C030, and if for the moment you ignore the blue text, the proposal was to remove an exception to the commercial requirement for certain properties. not shown on your screen is subsection 5, which actually requires residential and bans commercial for some of the area that is described in the strike through. The idea was that I think when it was first proposed, staff felt like it was redundant to say that there was an exception in 4 and then redefine the exception in 5. And I understand that, but the problem was by striking the exception entirely, you had 2 provisions that were completely contradictory. One said you must have commercial and the next one said you can't have commercial. So we're proposing to add in this blue language that just calls out the exception and it acknowledges that it exists.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So we have a substitute motion by Councilor Harding to substitute the implied motion with this current exhibit that we're looking at. Is that correct? Do I have a second? Mr. Sewell, Chair Sewell?
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion. And again, I've been watching the public comment. I don't see anybody with hands raised there. But does anybody have any question or comment on this substitute motion before we call for a vote? Okay, I'll go ahead and call for a vote. Chair Sewell?
Yes.
I, Vice Chair Shipley, will vote yes. Councilor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Councilor Fillmore?
Yes.
Councilor Hoban?
Yes.
Councilor Hanley?
Yes.
Councilor Harding?
Yes.
And thank you, Councilor Harding, for your work on this in conjunction with the staff as well. Thank you to both. We'll go ahead to the next item, item 7.
Excuse me, Vice Chair Shipley.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. This is a little bit confusing. This is the first time you've had to do this. So the vote that was just called was actually on the motion to switch the exhibits.
Oh, so we still need to vote for the implied motion?
Correct.
Okay. So we voted for the substitute motion. Do we need to open it back to public comment now at this point?
No.
Okay. Any further comment from the council before we vote on the substitute motion now? Or the motion, I guess, in front of us, the implied motion now, the substitute. Okay, we'll go ahead and call for another vote then. Chair Sewell?
Yes.
I will vote yes. Councilor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Councilor Fillmore?
Yes.
Councilor Hoban?
Yes.
Councilor Hanley?
Yes.
Councilor Harding?
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Jones, for helping us out on this. Keeping us on the rails today.
Happy to help.
So, thank you very much. The next item is item 7. It's an implied motion and ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 11 acres of real property located at 1920 West Center Street from community shopping or an SC2 zone to neighborhood shopping center SC1 and medium density residential MDR in the Fort Utah neighborhood. And again, if there are members of the public who want to say something about this item or make a comment about this item, you raise your hand now by pushing *9 so that when we get to that point, you'll be ready and we'll call on you. This will be presented by Mr. Aaron Ardmore from Planning as well. Mr. Ardmore.
Thanks, and less delay this time between items. So, John, if you want to put those slides up from earlier today. So this is the property that the Smiths and let's start with the other one. Smiths and Cox family own. There we go, on West Center Street. So this went through Planning Commission in November. It was decided in that meeting or shortly thereafter that we would hold off on bringing it to this city council until February. So here we are with the request of SC1 zone on the south half of these parcels and the medium density residential zone on the northern portion. This is an effort to rezone the property and open up the west side for a grocery store. I do have Keith and Dave with me from Redevelopment and Economic Development for specific questions on things related to the grocery store and the economic development efforts to get a grocery store out on the west side and how this plays into it. But as far as planning, if we can go to the next slide, there's on the Southwest Future Land Use Map that was adopted by City Council. This area is part of an area that's proposed as a commercial mixed use area. So staff thought it was important to retain some of the commercial viability along Center Street and Geneva. So we've provided that with the SC1 and provided the mixed use with the medium density residential. Also, Councilor Harding requested that we reviewed other SC1 zones in the city. So we have some slides on that, if we can move to those. So just briefly, different variety of uses through SC1 zones, kind of give an example of what that zone can provide. In this case, on North University, it's a mortuary and a flower shop. Next one is a service station, car wash, and gas pumps. Next. Further down Kenyon Road is a variety of office spaces and personal services. Next. Days Market on Kenyon Road with adjacent retail uses. Another service station. And then the last one is office space. And I think this is just to give an idea of different uses and the scale of what the SC1 provides. So I think staff was looking at the SC1 zone specifically to provide some of these retail uses to the community in this area of the city, and give the property owners the commercial viability still on the property. But that's all I have. If there's kind of planning related questions, I can try to answer those. And again, economic development is here to answer those type of questions.
Thank you.
If I could just maybe make a comment to add to Aaron's presentation. If you remember, one of the things that we were trying to do was to facilitate the opportunity for a potential grocery store on the west side. And one of the seeming impediments to that was this piece of property and Smith's Kroger's concern about a potential store there cannibalizing the existing downtown Smith store. And so through a long process of trying to reach out to them to find out their level of interest in that property and not being able to get that, we began to think that a possible solution to that would be to relieve them of the concern that this was a competing site and to turn it into something else that afforded the property owner, the Cox family, the opportunity to develop it in a way that met their expectations and needs and allowed us to find another property on the west side that could potentially be a suitable grocery store location. That effort and the beginning of the rezone process, I think facilitated to some extent conversations with Smith's and Kroger, and they began to look at the property and had suggested to us that it would take them a couple of months to do some analysis. We had some conversations with them and they seemed to be doing some research on that. We had told them that the expectation was that we would move this forward if we didn't sense that they were planning to pursue a store at this location. And that process seems to have stalled a little bit. We've tried to reach out to them to get communication about putting this before the council tonight and haven't been able to get a response back to them so far. And so, I don't know that it's fair to make any assumptions at all, but I guess a concern is that, if they were anxious to move this forward, I think they would be actively engaged, and sensing that maybe they're not. We think this helps us move this property away from the potential for a grocery store site and clears the opportunity for us to look at other locations. We have consistently heard, and David's communicated with several different other potential grocers, that the fact that this property has a lease agreement for a potential grocery store site eliminates anybody else's interest in pursuing a grocery store at any other property on the west side of Provo. And so we're hoping that by doing this kind of removes that barrier and allows those companies that have expressed interest in possibly moving forward on other locations that we have been working on.
Thank you. Questions from the council? So we have both Jonathan Hill, the neighborhood chair, on the call to represent the neighborhood, and it's been tradition for us to give him up to 5 minutes to represent the neighborhood. We also have Mr. Rick Cox as representing ownership on the property as well here tonight, and we'll give him obviously an opportunity to speak to this as well. But questions first from the council, just on the presentation. Yeah, Councilor Ellsworth.
I'm curious if any quantitative market research has been done on this site.
Yes, there has been some. It is a little bit, a couple of years old, but some of the analysis that was done just on, the shopping opportunity on the west side suggested that there was a need for more residential housing in that area, but that there was definitely a gap in shopping, and that there was some grocery store leakage in Provo in general because of the lack of a grocery store on this side of town.
Okay. Was that report distributed?
It's been several years ago. I think it was available, and I think the council and administration did have a copy of it, but that was before my time.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. When is the soonest that an alternative to this location could be utilized for a grocer on the west side, not just off I-50?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we have been talking to you about, and I think it's scheduled to be on the next Planning Commission agenda, is the rezoning of the property at the I-15 off-ramp on Lakeview Parkway. And so that definitely represents a potential for some kind of a regional retail facility. Our hope would be that if we were successful in that, that could be a draw not only for the west side, but for other people south of Provo as well. But there's also other property that we've considered. I mean, I don't want to be too specific about any of that because I think identifying specific properties can kind of exacerbate the potential of acquiring those and securing those for development sites.
Yeah, I guess my question is from an infrastructure standpoint or a planning standpoint, when is the soonest that the west side, not just right off I-15, could even potentially have a grocer if we change the zoning on this location now?
Probably about 3 to 4 years.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the council? Why don't we go ahead and transition then? I don't see any other hands raised from the council. Why don't we transition to Mr. Hill? Would you like to make some comments and represent the neighborhood, please? I don't know if I put you on the spot, but we appreciate you being here and would love to hear your feedback.
Sorry, unmuting this thing is always so hard. Okay, so first of all, I guess I don't have a ton to say tonight. You guys are all very aware of the situation on the west side, what we've been working with, the strong desire on the west side to have some more shopping, especially grocery, in our area, and we're very appreciative for the city to be pursuing this so hard. I guess what I can do is we did meet about this quite a while ago as a neighborhood in a neighborhood meeting. And there were kind of, I think, mixed feelings about it. I think most people felt like they understood the situation that we're in, where Smith's kind of has this property, and that is a deterrent to other grocers in the area, and kind of keeps us without a grocery store, and that Smith's was unwilling to move. It is too bad to see this property lost as a potential commercial property. It's right on the corner of two major roads on the west side, Geneva and Center Street. It's close to freeway access. It's not too far from downtown. It would be really great to see some good commercial go in here. But, I mean, they own it, they control it, and this seems like the only kind of reasonable way that the city can kind of force their hand a little bit and open up other opportunities so that we can get the grocery store and the other commercial that we would like out here.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Why don't we give some time to Mr. Cox? He's on the line, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm representing the Cox family, and we want to let you know that we think that the city has given Smiths ample opportunity to come forward and come with a proposal, and they have failed to do so. So we're supportive of whatever decision the city council wants to make this evening. We think that the change in the ordinance is appropriate and will not impact the Cox family negatively. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Since we're kind of in the mode of public comment, Councilor Ellsworth, do you mind if we go through public comment and then go back to council discussion? Or do you have a specific question?
I had a question for Mr. Cox, if that's permissible.
I think that's great.
I'm just curious, Mr. Cox, what would you want this property to be zoned to? What is the highest and best use of your property?
My sister and I are not totally in agreement, but I think that this is the best use of this property would be for a grocery store. And if there was an opportunity for another grocer to come in and want to put a grocery store there, we would work with them, or I would work with them to and see what we can work out. Maybe we can go to Smith's and get out of the lease. My sister would prefer seeing residential. She thinks that's the safest way to develop the property. She's concerned about a strip mall sitting right there on Center Street. And I agree with her on that we would not like to see just a strip mall with the residential behind it. We'd rather see something more of a village type situation if we were going to have commercial mixed with residential.
Thank
you, Mr. Cox. Any follow-up to that, Councilor Ellsworth?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have some public comment, it looks like. Let's go ahead and transition to public comment. If you're on the line or part of the meeting, *9 allows us to know that you're interested in saying something to this this subject. So looks like we've already got some people, but Karen, I'll let you take this segment.
The first one we have with the raised hand is Melanie McCord. Go ahead. One moment, she's using a different version of Zoom and it's giving me an interesting message. So I believe I had to promote her to do that, but we'll trust you, Melanie, to to not bomb our meeting. Here we go.
Well, now can you hear me?
Yes.
What I wanted to say is, yay. This has needed to be done for a long, long time. I was really in agreement with the mayor when she said during work session that she felt like Smiths had held us over a barrel. I think they have. Several years ago when John Curtis was mayor, I met with some of the regional guys from Smiths. They happened to be at the downtown store and I cornered them and asked them why. And they indicated that, they had questions about their downtown store as well. But you're missing an option here. It isn't just a matter of there is one more kind of pressure that you could put on it, and that is public pressure. There are hundreds and thousands of people who would sign a petition and approach Smiths from a grassroots option to get them to do this. And I'm willing to take that on and to organize that. But this, it's time to play hardball with Smiths. They are not doing one of the things that they claim is their corporate goal, which is to serve communities. They're not. And I think they need to be shaken up a little. And if I can put some public pressure on, I'd be glad to do that.
Thank you. Other comments? Karen, I don't see other comments. Do you have anybody else that has shown interest in commenting from the public?
I'm not seeing one more.
I see one now.
Scott Jorgensen, go ahead, state your name and city of residence. Go ahead, Scott. Scott, can you hear us?
Yes, 1 second. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we can.
Sorry, my daughter doesn't trust my webcam and she unplugs it. So
Oh, nice.
the USB was not plugged in. Anyway, I am Scott Jorgensen. I live in Lakeview South neighborhood, a neighborhood chair over here. We're very close to the Smith's property. I do have concern about the rezone. There's a couple of reasons.
Sorry, that one's on me.
Okay. Anyway, I do have some concerns about the rezone. I think this is the ideal property for a grocery store on the west side. Putting a grocery store next to I-15 off University Avenue will continue to see people in my neighborhood leak out to Orem to do their shopping. They're not going to shop at a store off University Avenue. I agree with Melanie. I think that we could put community pressure on them. I don't know if it would work, but it would be worth an effort to do so. Like Mr. Cox, when he was talking, wasn't interested in a strip mall, and the SC1 zone would essentially create a strip mall on Center Street. So I think it's the ideal property. It's unfortunate Smith has us tied up, but I would hate to see this rezoned to medium density residential when it's an ideal location for a grocery store. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Jorgensen. I do not see any other hands. Oh, just when I say that, people put their hand. Oh, sorry. That's so. Jonathan Hill, the neighborhood chair. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hi, sorry. Can you guys hear me? It's beeping in my ear.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just got some new thoughts as people were talking about putting public pressure. And one thing I've thought is I'm curious what economic development's plan going forward is. If we go forward with this rezone, are they going to inform Smith of this as kind of extra added pressure? Would there be an opportunity to do a kind of petition and try to push them that way? I mean, the zone rechange wouldn't be permanent and irreversible, right? If something did happen before a grocer committed to one of the other sites, is that correct?
So is somebody from planning still on the line and could help us with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best answer to that is we would do whatever we needed to do to put a grocery store there if it was an option. If Mr. Cox, as he moves forward, felt like there was a different zone classification that might better meet his needs, I think we could work with him. If we have been in regular communication with Smith's Kroger up until recently, they know that this item is on the agenda tonight. I think if they are continuing to evaluate that property and came back with us tomorrow, for example, if the city council decided to approve this zone change and they came back to us tomorrow and determined that they wanted to build a store there, I think we would be just as quickly back on your agenda as we could get to put whatever zoning in place would allow them to move forward with a store. I love citizen involvement, and I love hearing the comments that citizens would like to be engaged. I would reflect, though, that most of these retailers know our markets better than we do. And usually they're driven not necessarily by public input as much as they are by number of rooftops, traffic counts, and disposable income and things of that sort. But I think the best way to answer your question was if there was an opportunity to put a store here or to do something else that would maximize that property for the city and for the property owners, we'd be happy to do whatever we needed to do to make that happen.
Thank you. Any other comments, Karen, that you see?
No.
Okay, let's
Don't
go ahead.
see any sudden hands going up this time.
I was just going to suggest maybe we should close public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion. So maybe I'll make a quick comment since I don't see any hands raised, but I think the best use for this property is a grocery store. And so I have concern that if it gets changed and if plans get put in place to do something different with this property, then it's irreversible, right? At some point, you know, it's not irreversible immediately, but it's irreversible at some point. And that's why I asked the question earlier about how soon a different location on the west side would become available for a grocer. And I think the answer was 3 to 4 years. I think we might be stopping the opportunity at this location 3 or 4 years in advance of the next option. If the owner, and it sounds like the owner is fairly committed to being open to, you know, doing something different. You know, if a different grocer came along, you know, if Smith sold this property and then a different grocer came along to potentially still doing a grocery store there, obviously that sounds good to me because I think the best use for this property is a grocer for the west side. But like I said, I do have concern that if I'm the owner of the property and we rezone this, I start moving down the path of trying to build to what we rezone to, right? And at some point that's irreversible because they're going to go through the process and go down the road far enough that they can't pull back from it. And if we're 3 to 4 years out from a grocer, I guess that's my primary concern that I've already voiced. Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Councilor Shipley. I appreciate that concern, and I agree. And it seems like everyone is in agreement that a grocer is the best use of this property, and we would all love to see it happen. But in 20 years, it hasn't. Status quo really isn't serving the community, so we need to do something different. Our economic development or our public works can clarify this, but when I hear them say, you know, it's 3 to 4 years before we can have another grocer, I didn't necessarily hear, it wasn't clear exactly, but I didn't hear that was due to infrastructure. I think 3 to 4 years is just the time that it takes to, if we remove this barrier for other grocers to come in, it's still 3 to 4 years for them to work out through their process, get their approvals, buy the land, secure the land, build it, and actually open it. That's 3 to 4 years. But if we wait 3 to 4 years and then say, okay, we're serious now, you know, we're changing the zone, I still think it's going to be another 3 to 4 years after that, because that's just how long it takes to get a grocer from start to finish. And we're not going to get past the starting line until something new changes. And I would kind of say the same thing about the residents wishing to petition. Wonderful. I think that's great. Let's do it. I'd be surprised if that effort hasn't already been tried in the past. If we want to do it again, great. But again, this has been perplexing us for more than a decade. And if the solution was just a public pressure campaign, you know, why haven't we tried it already? I would say let's move forward with what's proposed tonight, and let's try whatever we want to do to maximize the likelihood that a grocer will come in on this site. But let's do that in addition to what we're doing tonight, so we can get the ball rolling. For years and years, we've said, well, maybe we can go to this option, but before we go to this option, let's exhaust every other option. And I think that's where we're at. I think we've waited, you know, years and years and years saying, well, maybe something else is going to happen. Maybe something else is going to happen. I think we're really at the point, let's do this. And if there's anything else that we can do to either encourage Smith or someone else to come in, great. But let's move away from status quo.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. I forgot to mention that this is the first hearing on this item, so it can be continued by any member of the council. Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with this proposal. To me, it feels or looks manipulative to change someone's private property rights with their zoning in order to elicit a response from a corporation. I'm also uncomfortable with the fact that this is just prime real estate. And we've seen this pattern before in Provo where we're rezoning property that's on major corridors, on important intersections, at gateways, and we're converting it from commercial to residential, which is not doing anything for our long-term tax base. I'm also not comfortable with saying we can just rezone this anytime we want back to commercial if we want to, because that looks capricious, which I think creates some liability for the city. And I'm also not comfortable with the fact that we haven't done any research, any market or economic research on this. There may be plans to do that after this decision has been made, after it's rezoned, but in my professional experience in the private sector, we do research and analysis before we make decisions. So that doesn't make sense to me. If we are going to spend $100,000 on market research, why not do that before we make this decision instead of after? It seems short-sighted, so I'm not in favor of this.
Thank you. Other comments? I don't see any hands raised yet. Mr. Hoban.
Yeah, I think it's easy to sit on the sidelines and say, let's save it for a grocer, but it's been 20 years. It's sat vacant. It's prime real estate sitting vacant. At least let's do something productive with it. So unless somebody has a grocer that's ready to line up and build there, I think it's the wrong thing for us to sit on the sidelines and say, let's save it for a grocer. I don't think it's happening, guys. It's time to maybe force our hand and let's do something different so that we can do something for the city of Provo and the people of the West Side, as opposed to just continuing to talk about this for the next 20 years while Smith sits on it again. I think we should do something rather than nothing. And I think if we don't rezone it, we're going to be sitting here in 20 years talking about the same thing. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Hoban. Mr. Hanley.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything from Rick Cox that gave me concern about how the owner feels about this. I didn't hear him describing this as manipulative, or in fact, I heard him saying that he felt like this was opening up opportunities for him. It does sound like he and his sister need to have further conversations and maybe make a decision about the direction they want to go. But it sounds like a grocery store is still a possibility, maybe with another entity. And if not, then there's some opportunity and presumably flexibility there with the ongoing conversations. So I'm in agreement with those who've spoken in favor of this. I think we need to do a little disruption here to open up some new possibilities.
Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Council Chair. I'm always hesitant to disagree with Councilwoman Ellsworth, but in this regard, I really don't think there's anything wrong with this proposal. The zoning ordinances are frankly a tool for us to use to do what we think is best for our citizens. There's an interminable logjam here that's been going on way too long. And I empathize too much with the citizens on this southwest part of town. I think we've got to do whatever we think is appropriate to provide them with that grocery store that they've hoped for years and years. And I don't think it's not so much manipulative as it is necessary to break this logjam once and for all.
If Mr. Jones is on, could I have you speak to any legal concerns that you have about this? I mean, I guess speak to the concern that Councilperson Ellsworth brought up.
Well, I mean, she mentioned the word capricious because that is the legal standard, that land use decisions are not intended to be arbitrary or capricious. I don't think it's capricious to say that you have the ability to change your mind about something down the road. When what I'm hearing from the proposal is that you would do so in reaction to a proposal. So if you rezone it now and later you have a proposal to rezone it, you examine that proposal and have some kind of reasonable basis for doing it, I don't think that there's an issue that way. So that gives any rise to any liability. So I think in the end of the day, it's just a question of whether you, let me back up and put it this way. As the land use authority, you have very broad discretion, especially with regard to rezones. And essentially you have the power to do what strikes you as good for the property, as long as what you're doing is not either illegal or has no rational basis whatsoever. So that's the question for you to ask yourselves.
Thank you. Chair Sewell.
I was just wondering if we have someone from staff that could give us a little clarification on Vice Chair Shipley's question about infrastructure. And basically another way to phrase it is, if this goes well and we start getting interest from other grocers in other areas of the west side, are there any roadblocks that would really slow that down, or will we be able to move quickly to take advantage of those opportunities?
Well, I think that the clarification on the 3 to 4 year timing is probably an accurate reflection of the fact that there would be a time lag in someone identifying property with us, putting together a plan, getting that submitted, getting it approved, and then getting the project built. I think that the infrastructure improvements that are taking place on the west side now are intended to resolve a lot of the concerns for supply and demand here in the next year. And so I don't think that that's an issue. Depending on where a store is located, you know, whether or not there's appropriate roads or things of that sort. I mean, that's a hard question to answer, because I don't know exactly a specific piece of property that we might be considering. There are several that we've talked about. But yes, I think that we could identify a piece of property. I think we could begin the process of moving forward with another grocer right away. I think the big impediment that we have heard so far is that the lease agreement that Smith's has on this property gives them a jump on that process. So any other grocer is hesitant to begin to be involved, because if they identified a piece of property tomorrow and to begin working on their process, they'd be, you know, a good 6 months behind Smith's if they decide to go ahead and pull the trigger, and nobody wants to assume that risk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Sewell, for that. So in my concern there, my question there is that if we focus on a regional supermarket, maybe down by I-15, if Vineyard or Orem along Geneva in our race to get a grocer happens to beat us, you know, to get a grocer, you know, opening this window, you know, potentially, you know, we're run the risk, obviously, of just not ever getting a grocer on the west side of Provo, if those two things happen. So the longer this might take, I guess my point is, and we may be delaying this even longer by not doing something tonight. My point is just that we are running the risk, the longer this goes, the harder it is to get a grocer out and put the infrastructure in place and move forward on this. The longer that goes, the more risk we run of one of our neighboring cities on the west side doing a grocer, or the regional grocer that we're, you know, maybe considering right off I-15, kind of taking away that opportunity from a you know, a neighborhood grocer wanting to be out here. So, and I say out here because I live on the west side. So I'm anxious, obviously, for this to happen. I'm very supportive of anything that I think would move the needle to get a grocer in this area. I just don't want to inadvertently close the door, you know, and open a longer window on accident, you know, by doing something tonight.
Maybe if I could just make a quick comment. I mean, we agree with you 100%. I think that when I started here, potential grocer on the west side was one of the very top priorities that was identified for me for us to work on. I think there's a long history of staff working on this project, and it's an ongoing concern. And I'm as concerned as you are that Orem beats us to the punch and does something on their southwest side of Provo and creates a problem for us. My concern right now is, all of our concern right now is, we're in an 8-year holding pattern right now, because that's the remaining life that Smith's has on that lease. And so really, if we're evaluating where we are right now, our position right now is we're not going to do anything for 8 years unless Smith's Kroger's decides to do something on that property before that time. We're not going to do anything. And I think the potential of somebody else building something somewhere else in Orem within that 8-year window is very, very high. And then I think it's over. And the only way I think we begin to move the needle to take that off the table so we can have the highest opportunity to beat them to that is rezoning this so we can identify another site.
Thank you. And if staff is confident that this moves the timetable, gives us more opportunities, and doesn't close a door potentially for the like I said, I keep referring to the west side because I you know, as much as I want a grocer off I-15 as well, I don't think it satisfies, you know, the west side's want for a grocer out here. So if it moves that timetable, and if you're confident of that, and then hearing Mr. Cox say that their family is not opposed to this, I can be supportive of this if that's the council's wish. So any other questions or comments before we go to a vote? I don't see any raised hands. So the implied motion is to amend the zone map classification. Oh, and again, if any one counselor would like to continue this is the first hearing, official hearing. Maybe I should give that a second before we go to a vote. Okay, so let's go ahead and vote on the implied motion, an ordinance amending the 11 acres. Chair Sewell.
Yes.
I will vote yes. Councillor Ellsworth.
No.
Councillor Fillmore.
Yes.
Councillor Hoban.
Yes.
Councillor Hanley.
Yes.
Councillor Harding.
Yes.
Well, the vote is 6-1 with Councillor Ellsworth opposed. Okay, so the ordinance passes. The final action agenda item for this evening is an implied motion that it's an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 1.07 acres of real property generally located at 50 East, 3900 North from residential R110 to very low residential or the VLDR designation. And this is in the Riverbottoms neighborhood. Again, for those of you who would like to speak to this from the public, I'd invite you to call in or log in now and go ahead and raise your hand already. But we'll first hear from our planning department, Mr. Aaron Ardmore.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing this item again. I think by this time we're all pretty familiar with kind of the history, so I won't dive real deep into that, but just suffice to say that the applicant has previously come forward with a zone change request for low density residential zone, which would permit 12 units per acre. At the time he applied, it was 15 units per acre. So his first proposal was in line with that. He was told in the decision on that one, where council did not vote in favor of that if he came back with a VLDR, recent zone that was added to Title 14, that there would be support from City Council. So he has done that. He came back in the last month with a concept plan that can meet the statutes and the regulations and the codes for the VLDR zone. That's what you have in front of you here. So the VLDR maxes out at 7 units per acre. He's showing here 7 units on a piece of land that he owns that's a little over an acre. I think it's 1.07 acres. Staff has been in support of this zone change request, and we recommend approval on this as well. We feel that it benefits the neighborhood as a whole. We feel that this is an appropriate place for a VLDR zone adjacent to University Avenue. And we feel that it helps to meet housing goals in Chapter 3 of the general plan to get some varied housing types. So we're in support of it, and that's all I really have at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Ardmore. We'll go ahead and have questions now before we open it to the public from the council. So, Mr. Hanley.
Thank you, Mr. Ardmore. Can you clarify what the rectangular shape is down at the bottom?
Yes, so that, and again, I think I will address that, Mr. Hanley. I think I want to express here is we are looking at a concept plan. If the zone passes, if it gets approved, the applicant or another party can come back with any plan that meets the VLDR zone. But on this proposed concept plan, this is an amenity space. So it's a sports court essentially for the community.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood what that was.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Ardmore? Okay. If no further questions, we've got both the neighborhood chair and the applicant. Perhaps we'll hear from the neighborhood chair first and give Mr. Rosen up to 5 minutes to represent the neighborhood on this matter.
Go ahead, Dave. You're there.
Thank you, Karen. City Council, my name is Dave Rosen. I'm the Riverbottoms Neighborhood Chair. And thank you for taking the opportunity to listen to me tonight. I think all of you received an email and a letter that I sent in earlier on this application, and I will try not to repeat those items. You've all had a chance to review those. Basically, what we have here is we have a plan and concept plan being presented that is very similar to how this started originally, with all the units on half the property and the density being put on the east side. This is not good planning. This has gone through multiple hearings with the Planning Commission, back and forth. They spent hours counseling and giving advice to the developer on how to better position this to make it mix and mash with the neighborhood and to reduce the density down. You'll remember that the last plan, and over that time period, it's gone from the original house being removed off to multiple houses, 12 down to 10, and that's what it was last time. When the council rejected 10, said 10 density was too many, but proffered the VLDR zone of 7. And now the developer's back here, but he's back presenting a plan that puts all of the density on the east side and not on the west side, leaving the original house, with the potential that that will then be requested to be rezoned, and we could end up with even more than the 10 units that was rejected in the first place. So from that standpoint, the council was voted into office by the people. The neighborhood has substantially voted against this changing from single family, R110, to very low density. In spite of that, the council has offered the developer a very low density residential with 7 lots. Now it's up to the council to protect the neighborhood and say, yes, there will only be 7 lots. And yes, we need to limit it to 7 homes on the property. To not allow this to then come back, the council needs to look forward. This developer has shown that they want to maximize the number of units on the property. And so there are tools that can help provide the very low density, but also protect the neighborhood and the neighbors and the community such that good planning is done on here. That there's a consistent, the higher density would be on the west side, closer to University Avenue, and tending towards the lower density on the east side. That is in form of a development agreement. As I heard this afternoon, maybe there's another tool, an R1.6 zone that would allow for those units. As I did a division on that, those require a minimum of 6,000 square foot per lot. That would allow 7 units to be put on that property. And I think there's tools that the council can use to provide the developer the opportunity to put 7 units on there, but also allow those who are building homes right across the street and plan on living in them for many, many years, that 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, there isn't suddenly 5, 6 more units put on 4/10 of an acre on that west side. And so that's what we as a neighborhood ask, that you consider the tools that are available, that you use those along with the offer that you've made, and keep the density at not more than 7 units. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave Rosen, for that. Why don't we, does staff have any response to that before we go to Mr. LaFontaine and have the applicant potentially answer concerns there?
Maybe just to say that the VLDR zone does have some design regulations, and some of those are fronting the units to the streets and things like that, which would have to be adhered when a future applicant comes back with a project plan application and the Planning Commission reviews that. The idea that he would be able, or anybody would be able to increase the density at a later point, well, it would take a lot of action. It would take a subdivision. It would take another zone change request coming in from the city council. So I don't think that's a given. So I just kind of wanted to address that and make the point that that's a bit of a harder process than maybe was perceived.
Thank you. Mr. LaFontaine, would you like to speak on your behalf as far as this development is concerned?
Certainly. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you to the council again for hearing this. And by the way, I was sent some of the public comments that were emailed to the council, but noticed that at least 15 of the positive ones that I know of were not included. So hopefully they were viewed by you, the council, so that you can see that the vast majority of the local residents wholeheartedly approve of the zone change and project. And just in reading through everything, the comments, just to go back on what Aaron, Mr. Ardmore has said, you know, I've been through this process. We're down to now this very low density residential. And there's, you know, I've done everything that I've been asked to do. Looking at the comments, I didn't see anything in this, this zoning that would, that required me to have a equal distribution of the houses throughout the property. And I think what the neighbors are doing is pretty speculative. And as Mr. Ardmore said, you know, if that were the case on a future owner of this property, then they'd have to go through the proper steps, and heaven forbid if they wanted to do that, but it's a possibility. So lastly, you know, this neighborhood, it consists of 0.4% of the 116,600 residents in Provo. And with that in mind, I'd like you to consider the neighborhood chair's claim that there is an overall 80% opposition to the zone change. But that percentage is based on those who actually responded to this inquiry, or his inquiry, and it's not, which is not 100% of this neighborhood. The rest of the entire neighborhood are either for the project, or don't care, or don't wish to engage in neighborhood warfare and maintain the peace. And again, whatever percentage it is, it's only 0.4% of the Provo population. So this property, as it's gone through you, the city council, as well as the zoning, and you know, it's obvious this property could easily be given that zone change. And again, I just one thing, you know, at the very beginning of this process, which was over 2 years ago, I had one of my neighbors say to me, quote, "We won't allow anything except a park on your property." And to me, at the time, I didn't think much of it, but then I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I think that speaks volumes of where this neighborhood's resistance to anything submitted comes from, regardless of my multiple plan changes, from decreasing the number of units from 15 to 7, costly renderings, plat layouts, engineering changes, etc. So I hopefully there are some positive things, people that call in tonight. I know there's a majority of them that are out there, but I think you'll be hearing from probably more of the same people. But I would like to thank you guys for your time and your efforts on behalf of this project.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and transition, Karen, to public comments. And then if we have more questions for the applicant or for the neighborhood chair, I guess, from the council, we can go back to that after.
Yeah, that'll work just fine. So we have quite a few. So I will start with caller whose number ends in 7147. Go ahead and it should tell you to hit *6 to unmute. There you go. State your name, city of residence, and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Whitney Tanner, and I'm a resident of Provo City. I'd like to state that I purchased my home recently in Provo, just last year in July 2020. And the reason I moved from Orem to Provo is because you set a higher bar for housing and the community zoning in general. So that's very important to me, and I'd like to state that for the record. This item has been addressed on multiple city councils, so if I could just make a joke that it's appropriate, we're here on Groundhog's Day, seems appropriate. But I'd love to say, I brought this up in prior letters to the council. I've had some objections to the LaFontaine proposals in the past. This is absolutely not feasible based on the grounds of parking alone. As a single family unit with a 90-degree angle garage, I've got a 2-car garage and I drive a Honda Civic, and I have to tell you, I park at an angle. It's just not feasible for parking. This plan doesn't allow for any above ground parking for visitors or guests. And hopefully this pandemic will end. We'll be able to gather and have events, and the neighbors and the city are going to have to deal with the parking problem. And that's really distressing to me. I also don't understand why the sports court is on the commercial side of the property versus the homes. So I think that the layout's funky. I would like to see the parking addressed better. I looked up a VLDR according to Provo, and this is the definition I found. A VLDR is an attractively landscaped one-family, detached or attached, and two-family residential lots and structures. A VLDR limits the land in question to no more than 7 dwelling units per gross acre. And I think it's interesting that the LaFontaine proposal has 7 units on just 0.6 of an acre. Their original house stays. And so I don't feel like that is in keeping with the integrity of the VLDR. We've already shot down an LDR. So I would like to propose that they maintain the integrity of the VLDR and stick to the proposal. I feel like it's deceptive to our city council members, keeping the house on here and going with the original 7 approved. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will next move to Dave Horn. Go ahead and state your name and city of residence, and you will have 2 minutes to comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Dave Horn, live at 65 East, 3900 North, adjacent to this this proposed property. I built a new home in the neighborhood a year ago, and moving back after raising my family here for 20 years. Primarily, I've been very concerned that Mr. LaFontaine's attitude and comments, even tonight, demonstrates antagonistic attitude against the neighborhood. He claims the same with the neighborhood back to him. He's done that in previous meetings. And I'm really concerned because he's the one that's creating the battle, because he seems to only want to work with and meet with the city council members or the planning commission and staff, which seem to have no clues what this single family neighborhood is about. This proposed new plan has no way the consistency of buffering the neighborhood as previously desired or presented. It's actually puts it right in the middle. And the proposed design, even though it's a concept plan, it looks more like duplexes. They don't even look like townhomes anymore. And so I'm very concerned. And again, like with the parking and everything else, I think Mr. LaFontaine keeps backpedaling. He's unwilling to meet with the neighborhoods. We've got new homes in this neighborhood right around this property that are being built. And this is really a digress of the atmosphere of the neighborhood. And Mr. Ardmore doesn't have a clue. Sorry. It's the city plan needs to go elsewhere to create low density. So thank you. I hope you will empathize with the residents of the neighborhood and, vote no. This is not what needs to go in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. The next commenter is caller with the phone number ending in 7537. Go ahead and unmute your phone and state your name, city of residence, and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Leslie Tanner, and city of residence is Provo, and I've actually never commented in one of your meetings before. I've written an email, but that's about it. The city council gave Mr. LaFontaine a concession last time to change it to VLDR, which allows the 7 units on 1 acre. But he wants to put all 6 on a half an acre to the east. And Mr. LaFontaine has told multiple neighbors that they have no intention of staying in the neighborhood. So they really have no stake in this other than to make money. What is to prevent him from tearing his house down or selling it and having them tear it down and requesting another change in zoning and place 6 more units there? The city council has already told Mr. LaFontaine this isn't acceptable, and this is just another end run around the city council or kind of a bait and switch. How will you protect us from this? You've already told him no, and you're as tired of all of this as we are. We really don't want to let this happen. We know we just really want you to stand firm and be final this time, once and for all, and end this, because it's just over and over and over again. It's starting to feel like we're being bullied a little bit. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tanner. Next is Michael Call. Go ahead and unmute and state your name and city of residence. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Michael Call. I'm a resident here in Provo and a resident of the neighborhood. Just wanted to say I'm really eager to support a good development plan for this property, and I think most of us are. This particular one just doesn't strike me as really good developmental practice. Back in November, I was really impressed by a number of comments made by city council members that showed that even if we disagreed perhaps about the specific density allowance here, the council seems solidly committed to good development practice. And this particular plan doesn't really strike me that way. It feels kind of uneven. It concentrates the density, as others have discussed. And it concentrates it farthest from University Avenue. It kind of creates this unexpected transition from single family to then several townhomes, then back to single family again. I was really hoping to be able to support Dan's proposal this time. I think many of us are anxious to reach closure on this. It just doesn't feel like a good faith effort to develop the property along the lines of what was discussed at the November meeting. And so I would urge the council, I know that many of you care deeply about good developmental practices, and that's what we would like to see here, is something that looks really nice. And VLDR, I think, would be fine, again, if it were adhered to in a way that kind of keeps to the spirit of the thing as opposed to just strictly sticking to the letter. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. So we're going to move to caller with the number ending in 6290. Go ahead and hit *6 to unmute your phone. State your name, city of residence, and you have 2 minutes.
Yes, this is Brian Zillick of Provo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I am a very close in proximity neighbor to the property in discussion, and I've been following along with this through the Planning Commission and the council, and I'd like to thank all of you all. I really do appreciate how thorough it has been and fair it has been, and the thought and care that has been taken. I was also thinking after the last meeting that, oh, he'll come back with the VLDR request and we'll get somewhere this time. And I think most of the neighborhood is supportive of the fact that he wants to do something with his property and probably wants to make some money off of it. And all we're asking is to be included in it and for it to be something that's good planning. And this is not it. I was shocked when I saw it. I couldn't believe it. And after hearing Mr. LaFontaine again tonight, it really kind of angered me a little bit, quite frankly. I was planning on being super nice tonight in my comments, but some of the things that he said tonight, I think just, speak for themselves about his tone, the way he has not included the neighborhood, his motives. He really gave a nice sob story for himself. With that, I think the bottom line is this particular plan, it reeks, it's manipulative. Whether Mr. Ardmore says it would be hard for him or the future owner of the home piece of the property to go through that process again, maybe it would be hard. It doesn't mean that's not the intention, but to have those townhomes or whatever they're called on that east side is ridiculous and does not make sense for anybody other than that motive alone. And I'm sure that the council is shrewd enough to see through this. And I hope that that's the case. Mr. LaFontaine has never once sought partnership with the neighborhood on what might work for everyone. And I don't blame him for wanting to get money from his property at all. But I think there's a line between wanting money and greed. And I think that's what we're looking at now.
Thank you for your comments.
Karen,
yes.
Real quick, just want to interject. Just for those that still haven't commented, please don't, no personal attacks or calling out of staff. I don't think we should have any appetite for that tonight. Mr. Ardmore is doing his job, what we ask him to do. He doesn't have a dog in this hunt, so leave him out.
So that's a good point to make. And we do try to say that in the neighborhood meetings as well. Please, address the comments to the project itself and not the people. So caller with the number ending in 4857, go ahead and unmute your phone and state your name, city of residence, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm Phyllis Rosen. I live in the Provo neighborhood, the same neighborhood. And I agree that most of our neighborhood is for a good, proper use development. But most of the neighborhood, all of the people that I have ever talked to are not happy with the plan that has been presented. In the past, the city council and even the planning commission has talked to Mr. LaFontaine quite a bit about figuring out how to match the neighborhood, the look, the feel, so that it flows well together. I agree with those who have called in prior to me saying that this plan does not really fit anything, and Mr. LaFontaine has not really worked with us to try to come up with something. In the last city council meeting, a really good statement was made that a good plan lifts everyone. And there is a solution out there that would make everyone happy. We're not opposed to development. We're not opposed to him selling his property or making money. But we are opposed to having a less than appropriate type buildings put on there that degrade the neighborhood and make us feel unhappy. There should be a common ground, and I would suggest that the city council insists that we find it and that we work toward that. And I also would insist or hope that the city council would find a way to protect the integrity of the neighborhood should they approve his plan. And he comes back, he seems, every time we turn around, he's come back with a different plan. And there's no guarantee that he's not going to turn around and do the next other half of where his house is with higher density. And I just think the city council needs to protect our own neighborhood. We have acted in good faith for over 30 years. Most of us have lived here. I've lived here 28, and most of us have lived here longer. And we need protection from. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen. Our next caller, the phone number ends in 9923. Go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name, city of residence, and you will have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Brianne Heiner, and I'm a resident of Provo in this neighborhood that we're talking about. And I don't really feel the need to reiterate what's already been said, because what I would say is basically what everyone has said. So I'd just like to say ditto, and I would like to see Mr. LaFontaine able to develop his property, but in a way that flows well with the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heiner. Next, we have Katie Steed. Go ahead and state your name, city of residence, and you will have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mark Steed, even though I'm on my wife's computer. Katie is here with me. We are residents of Provo and live in the neighborhood. We wanted to say thank you to the City Council for your efforts in this behalf, and we hope that you are wise enough to see and seek out the council that has been given. We agree with a lot of what's been said. Good planning is good planning, and it seems that it would be a very slippery slope to build 6 residents in the east side of that property and then not expect the west side to then follow suit. And then we're stuck with basically low residential, an LDR zone there. And so my wife, Katie, also has some things to say.
I just would say that I hope that Dan LaFontaine is still listening, because there's probably not someone I admire more for how he has raised his family and been a friend to all of us. And we really, truly have a desire to work with him. And I really, truly feel that's the sentiment of the majority of the neighborhood. And we would like to see a good compromise. I love the LaFontaine family. There is not a family I respect more. And things can get complicated when you're dealing with these issues, but I really think we can get to a situation that we can both be happy with. And I really hope we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. LaFontaine. Okay, we have one more caller with the last digits 5296. Go ahead and unmute and then state your name, city of residence, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Yeah, hey, thank you for hearing my comment. This is Paul Perry in Provo. Some of the council will know my name from a past concern I had about my property on the hillside. I've known the LaFontaines for many years, and I didn't know this was going on. I was watching the council meeting months and months ago when I had a concern of my own, and my heart goes out to them. I know that the neighbors here are concerned. I've listened to the concerns again tonight. Like the cars can't pull into the garage. There's not enough room. And you have to understand that if the city planning and engineers said that it is possible and they've looked at it, then it is possible. I mean, there'd be no reason to deceive us tonight. And I also know a lot about Danny's character and his family. I've known his parents. These are not people that are going to take you or take advantage of the situation. If they're planning on moving out of the neighborhood, which they've not told me, they're not going to leave you holding the bag, so to speak. They're just not those kind of people. And if I could say anything, one thing I sent just a brief letter this morning that compromise is the oxygen of democracy. At some point, we have to recognize that he's going to be a broken man if you keep pushing this. He's just like the rest of us. He's seeking fair property rights. I hope that's considered tonight. Thank you for letting me speak. And I just want to tell everyone here on the call that I understand your feelings about this. Maybe there's some way you can meet with him and talk to him again, but he's just not that he's going to burn you in the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much for everyone who's commented. I don't see any other hands going up, so I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for helping us out with the calls. Okay, so we'll bring it back to the council for discussion. And let's see, looks like Chair Sewell is ready to go. So, Chair Sewell.
Thank you, Vice Chair Shipley. And let me just say before I make my comments, I appreciate you chairing the meetings today. I think you're doing a great job and you're making it look easy. It's making me think about maybe an early retirement here. So anyway, so I have a number of thoughts on this. First of all, I appreciated kind of the spirit of the last couple of comments there from Katie Steed and Paul Perry. This is not about whether the property should develop or not. It's about how it should develop. And I don't think it's about whether or not VLDR would be a good density and zone, because that was what we decided a couple of months ago that it would be when we asked for the applicant to come back with a proposal. But like many of the residents in the area have expressed, I was really surprised when I saw this. It was not what I was expecting at all. In my 7 years on the council, I don't remember a case where we included existing properties in that were not going to be developed in a rezone for the express purpose of increasing the density of the properties that the parcel that was going to be developed. And that's kind of the way I see this. I was curious, so I asked Aaron last week if he could remember anything like this. He's been here about 12 years. I've only been here about 7. And he thought of a couple of cases where existing properties that weren't being developed were included in a rezone, but nothing really analogous to this. Like the closest one we came up with, unless he's thought of something else, was a fourplex in an RC zone that existed, and the owner wanted to add another fourplex next to it, and so they rezoned both parcels, even though only one was being developed. But again, that's not a case of, if I could coin a phrase, borrowing density from one area of a project to increase density in another. Or let me rephrase that, borrowing density from a parcel that's not being developed to increase density in a parcel that is. So even though I'm not aware of having done this in the past, that's not necessarily a problem, but in and of itself, but I do think there are very good reasons to not set a precedent of doing this. And I could give a lot of hypothetical examples, but I'll just focus on this one since that's what we're talking about tonight. As has been pointed out, this current proposal concentrates the density almost entirely on one side, except for the one remaining unit. And it's backwards from what good planning would suggest. Was if you're going to have higher density, it should be closer to University Avenue on the west side. I'm going to just pick a specific example to show you what I think would happen. So the property is 1.07 acres. We don't know exactly the extent of the area being proposed for the townhomes because it hasn't been drawn out, but I'm just going to estimate or pick an example, I guess. Let's say that it's 0.57 acres on that side and 0.5 acres on the west side. So if you put 6 acres on the east, 6 units on the east with 0.57 acres, then that leaves one house on half an acre on the west side. The whole property is zoned VLDR. So if the applicant or a future owner wants to redevelop that house, it's already zoned VLDR. So the only place to go from there is LDR. And I just don't think it's realistic to think that the council would, either this council or a future council, would deny an LDR rezone and tell the owner that they have to have only one house on that half acre. VLDR would allow 3 units on half an acre. LDR would allow anywhere between 4 and 6. So I think the rezone would have at least 4, if not more. So in my opinion, the highly likely result of this, and it's hard to say when this would happen, is that you would end up with anywhere between 10 and 12 units eventually on the property. So I personally just think this circumvents the whole intent of what we had offered, and is not a good example of good planning, is not respectful of the character and sentiment of the neighborhood. Of the 50 or so families that live in the immediate vicinity, the only ones I've heard from are against it for the reasons that you've heard tonight. There may be some that don't care or that haven't spoken up that I don't know about. So I see 2 alternatives here, and I think one's a lot better than the other to as far as ways that this could move forward. And one would be simply to stick with what I think was the original intent here, and that would be a VLDR proposal for the entire property that either has roughly uniform density, or if there's going to be a slight increase on one side or the other, the higher density should be toward University Avenue and a smoother transition toward the low density single family neighborhood. So that's something I could support. Like many of the neighbors had expressed, I think many were thinking that this was going to be the compromise, and that most of the neighborhood was going to feel good about it. And I thought that's where we were headed, but I hope that we could still get there if the applicant is willing, because I really do think, in the spirit of what some have suggested, that would offer an opening for a proposal that would have broad support and that would fit really well with the neighborhood. The other possibility that I don't like as well, but could potentially work, is if the applicant truly has lost any desire to develop that west side and is not even thinking about that, then just come back with a VLDR rezone proposal for just the eastern portion that's actually going to be developed. For example, in this same example that I just gave, that might allow, well, I'd have to do the math, but 3 or 4 units on the east side, and then depending on where you draw the line, then that would allow for a future rezone to VLDR, where you could put another 3 or potentially 4, depending on how many ended up on the east side. So those are my thoughts and suggestions on where to go from here.
Thank you, Chair Sewell. I'll remind the council that this is the first time that, even though we've talked about this before, this is the first time that this specific implied motion is found on the table, and any one council member can continue this item if they wish to. Okay, other comments? I don't see hands raised from the council. Councilor Ellsworth, please.
Yeah, I'd just like some clarification from staff on, maybe I misunderstood Mr. Sewell, but it sounded like a broader section was being, or more parcels, more acreage was being applied to this density. What did I understand or misunderstand with that?
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Councilor Sewell, but I think you were giving a hypothetical wherein the current proposal in front of you is to rezone the entire 1.07 acres to VLDR. There's no subdivision requested. I think anything of that nature is speculative at this point. All that's in front of us tonight is a zone change request for the entire property.
Okay, they're not getting a density bonus.
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Harding.
Thank you. Let me just start off by saying I understand that this is a very emotional issue for the people involved, but I was disappointed in some of the tone and the personal attacks that we heard earlier tonight, and there were several that engaged in that. I did appreciate the thoughts that were shared more towards the end of the public comment period, and I'd ask everyone to keep things civil, and we can do better. We've talked a little bit. We've heard a lot about good planning, and infill development often will look different than greenfield development, and there are a number of best practices, and I'm actually I like the idea that we are keeping the existing home that's already there. I think it's there's a lot of advantages of keeping our existing homes when conducting infill development, and so I appreciate that some people were surprised by the plan that was brought forward, but I looked at that, and it made a lot of sense to me, and I was fairly involved with the creation of the VLDR zone, and it was very, this is the kind of flexibility, this is the kind of proposal that I would expect coming from the VLDR. Mr. Ardmore, can you confirm, help me make sure that I understand this correctly? Are we approving the concept plan that we have seen tonight?
No, that is an administrative function. The council would just be voting on the zone change.
Okay. And is the concept plan, knowing that it doesn't have all of the details, but is it roughly compliant with the VLDR zone?
It seems to be roughly compliant with the VLDR zone. Of course, you'd have to come back with a project plan in front of staff and the Planning Commission. Would it have been possible for him to present a very different concept plan for us to rezone the request to VLDR, and then for this developer or a future developer who acquired the land to come back with a very different concept plan, as long as it met the requirements of the VLDR zone? That's correct.
Okay. So you know, there has been some accusations of kind of some underhandedness, but if anything, I feel like, you know, this proposal has been, you know, completely above board, and you know, it is within the realm of possibilities of what the VLDR zone allows. Let me speak just a little bit to the concern that if the density is concentrated in one area, then later on the existing home could be taken down and a new zone could be requested for that. You know, so it could end up going over 7 units. You know, changes, rezone requests can always be submitted to the council, and future councils can always grant those requests. I think that there's a lot of value in councils being consistent, and you know, but while understanding that conditions change and plans and development should be incremental and change over 30 years, over 20 years, over 10 years. But even in the time that we've been together, I think you guys have well, I think the plan that was approved, I voted against a plan approval. This was the Franklin neighborhood master plan. I voted against approval of that, in particular for, I felt there were some areas that should have been planned for future use or future zoning as LDR. And but the proposal that was before us did not have that LDR in it. So I voted against it. I didn't agree with it. But then I think it was this year, or sorry, in 2020. So I think you know, that the request came that asked for an LDR rezone in this area. So it was actually exactly what I was hoping for, but I voted against that because it was not compliant, or it was not consistent with the plan that the council had previously approved. And so I think there's reason to believe that the council, if we approve this, that we could be consistent and turn down future rezone requests just because of the decision that we made. Another way to look at this is, if a couple of months ago there was not sufficient council support for LDR, why would we change in just a matter of you know, in a short amount of time? Why would we change and say, okay, well, now we're going to allow it in a 2-step process when we wouldn't allow it in a 1-step process? So I think there's some good reason to believe that the council would not just change our mind and allow for a de facto or 2-step LDR when we didn't allow it in the first place. And then I guess the last thing is, since we are approving since we're considering an approval of a rezone and not the concept plan, if we do decide to rezone this as VLDR tonight, there's nothing that would stop discussions from going on for other configurations. And if you know, so that doesn't preclude other plans. And so the developer and the neighbors still could work on some things that could, you know, and come up with a different plan if they can come to an agreement on that.
Thank you. Mr. Hanley.
So I feel maybe I could just ask a question of Mr. Ardmore and then make a comment, but I think Mr. Harding's correct that there's nothing that would prevent those conversations from going forward. But I guess what I'm interested in is what incentivizes it or even requires it. Because if there is no discussion, then I think and there is no other alternative concept plan that we might be looking at that would go with this rezone, I'm not inclined to support the rezone, although I want the rezone. I want VLDR in this area, but I share some of the concerns that have been raised. So I'm wondering, Mr. Ardmore, what options are available to us to, I mean, if we just said no, and maybe Brian Jones can help here too, but I'm just kind of curious to know how we could protect against the possibility of this further densification down the line.
I'll try to answer that question. What I think your question is. So if the VLDR was approved tonight, that provides the opportunity for this property to develop to those standards, right? It wouldn't come back to you. It wouldn't require a public, it would require a public meeting at Planning Commission. It wouldn't require a neighborhood meeting for a project plan. So he could move forward with something similar to the concept he's shown. He could completely change it. There's nothing guaranteeing any design layout with the decision tonight. As far as saying no to this tonight, if that was the decision, I don't know. Essentially, if the property owner wanted to do something with his property, he'd have to start from the beginning again, make a new application and go from there. But I haven't had any discussion with the applicant to what his reaction to that would be.
So, and I'm sorry if I'm not, if 3 years on the council has not benefited me at all, but I'm still confused about the idea that we could have been looking at a different concept plan tonight that we liked, and we could have voted for the rezone and then gotten a project we didn't like because a developer says, I'm going to put all 7 units on one side and so on. And we never get to see that again. So we may end up, so because it's a concept plan as opposed to a project plan, why is it that we can't see a project plan and decide what we think?
So there's pros and cons to the concept plan, right? I think the idea of the concept plan was to give you an idea of what could happen with the zone change request. But the con, of course, is what you're referring to, is that it can be completely something totally different from what you've seen, provided it still meets the zone. I think in my time, I've seen zone changes. They used to come to the council without a concept plan. The concept plan is kind of a newer, in the last few years, application that was put in to the system to provide some images for the council to see as they make their decision. But in no way does it bind them to that. Again, that's an administrative function. If they meet the statutes of the zone that they're in, it would be approved by the Planning Commission.
But Mr. Hanley, even if an applicant came forward with a zone change and a project plan, the project plan could change completely once the zone change is passed, once the zoning is approved, if that new project plan meets the requirements of that zone they just got approved. The only thing that ties that project plan or that concept plan to that zone change is a development agreement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me weigh on and say that too. I'm glad you said that, Bill, because that's exactly right. And that's what I was going to say is don't make the mistake of thinking that what you're talking about is a difference between a concept plan and a project plan, because that's not the issue here. Okay. The issue here is that zoning is not, you're not really being asked to approve a project. At the end of the day, you're being asked what is the proper zone to be applied for the ideal world. The text of the zone should require a builder to build something that you would be satisfied with once the zone has been put onto the property. The reality is that a lot of times that's not the case, and there's differing philosophies about whether it's not the case because the zone doesn't have enough description in it, or because elected officials get too far down into the weeds about what the actual design of the building is instead of what the, right? And I'm not accusing you of that. I'm saying that those are the philosophical questions at play, right? That the real question you're being asked, though, is what is the zone that should apply to this property? And the only reason you could be asked that question in the complete absence of any plan whatsoever. Somebody could just come and say, I think that sometime in the future, I'm going to build something here, and the right thing to be built is something that fits into this zone, so please rezone my property. And they could show you absolutely nothing. The reason why that doesn't usually happen is because the council usually wants to say, well, in order for us to make the decision that now is the right time for that zone to be applied to this property, we want to have an idea of what it is that might be built. And again, in a perfect world, a concept plan could be shown to you, and you would say to yourselves, if we like this plan, we'll like any concept plan that the zone that comports with the zone, because we have so much trust in the zone, and we know that the zone requires to be built what we want to be built in the situation where this zone is being applied to the land. As Bill just said, and the reality is that unless you have a development agreement proffered by the developer saying, what I will build is precisely what I have shown to you, you never have a guarantee that that's what's going to be built once you rezone the property.
Okay. Well, that's all very helpful. I mean, I do feel like VLDR is the right zone. And I think we just established that at our last, discussion of this. So I don't, and I'm not interested in rehashing all of the different arguments about that, because we went through them pretty extensively several months ago. And I'm also not interested in speculating about Mr. LaFontaine's motivations. I mean, I think it's perfectly feasible that the reason he came up with the design plan or a concept plan that he did was because he's interested in staying in that house. So I don't want to attribute any sort of motives there that some others have tried to do. I think but the bottom line is that the rezone right now doesn't give me the confidence that we would get what I thought we wanted. And maybe that's because there's a weakness in that zone, or this is an unusual situation because there's a single home there that is desirable by the developer. And so it's created this kind of difficult circumstance. So as is, I don't feel like I can approve it, even though I want the VLDR and think that's the right zone, because I don't have the confidence that if that kind of a concept plan becomes the actual project, that wouldn't lead to undesirable results down the line. So it would be nice to be able to proceed with greater confidence than I feel right now.
Thank you. Councilor Fillmore. You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To be frank, I find myself empathizing with Mr. LaFontaine. It's been a long and arduous process, and we're still not at a good resolution. But on a policy basis, I find myself in agreement with Chairman Sewell, both his concerns and the suggestions he's made. If we had to vote tonight, I guess I would probably vote against the matter before us, unless the matter could be postponed for a meeting between Mr. LaFontaine and the neighbors. I'm a little surprised that that's never taken place, according to comments we've heard tonight. But if people could get together, be thoughtful and creative, I'm always optimistic that reasonable people can find a compromise that's acceptable to both sides. And then if we could find that compromise, maybe we could add a development agreement to a zone change here in the future. But again, I would hope that kind of a meeting could take place if it has not taken place yet.
Mr. Fillmore, would you prefer us to continue this, or would you just not be supporting this? I guess I would like to clarify that.
Yeah. Well, if there was some expression on the part of both sides tonight, a willingness to have such a meeting, and maybe don't mean to put him in a bad spot, but this is Mr. Sewell's neighborhood. Maybe he can help mediate that discussion. No one is more fair-minded than Dave, and I think that's worth trying. But on the face of it tonight, I would vote against it.
Thank you. Councilor Ellsworth, please.
Yeah, like Bill, I empathize with the developer. I feel badly that this has been such a long process, and they're spending a lot of money on all these different drawings and all these different proposals. And I believe they have met with the neighborhood before. Someone will clear this up, but it was probably months ago. Yeah, someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the developer has met with the neighborhood. I'm also in this weird position where I'm thinking about other areas of our city that have higher density than this, and there's just no consternation. 200 units can be approved in 20 minutes, and this is taking months and months and months. So I know that there are different situations, but at the same time, there is a dramatic need for housing. And so I'm trying to grapple with why 10 units is so painful. I don't understand that.
Thank you. Mr. Ardmore, would you speak to kind of the history, neighborhood meetings, please?
Yeah, I can confirm there was a neighborhood meeting held nearly a year ago now, February 25th of 2020. That's the only one I know for sure happened. I'm not sure of any other discussions.
Thank you. Other comments from the council? And I will just note that there is an attendee raising their hand. We've closed the public comment period, and so unfortunately, the time for those comments is done. Chair Sewell.
A few more comments. I believe that original neighborhood meeting was probably for the very first iteration of the plan, the 15 units or whatever it was at the very beginning. Mr. Fillmore was very kind in his comments. If the applicant was of a mind to have a meeting with the neighborhood, I think that would be wonderful. If there's any inclination to try to find a compromise that would work well, I think that would be wonderful. I would leave it up to the applicant and the neighborhood chair to decide if my presence there would be helpful or not, and would be happy to participate if it was deemed helpful by both parties.
Thank you. Maybe I would like some direction from the council on whether or not it would make sense to continue this for long enough to review options with the neighborhood meeting with the applicant, or whether or not it would make more sense to just vote on this tonight, the implied motion. So anyway, just trying to think through whether or not we're trying to delay a rezone or whether or not we're saying no to the rezone. And what I'm hearing from most people, I think, is that we're not saying no to the rezone. We just think that there might be some more steps to take. So if we could speak to that, Career Handling, please.
Well, I guess I was maybe thinking of asking Mr. Sewell that question, given his proposal. But I mean, that's what I would prefer. I would prefer to wait and see if there's some possibility of more agreement, and then maybe some security or guarantee of what actually would be implemented going down the line, and that would give us a lot more confidence in the rezone, and it would make this a much easier decision. But if it turns out that that's not possible or desired, then I think we could just bring it back and decide on at that point. So I'm inclined to wait if there's that possibility of that conversation.
Thank you. Councilor Ellsworth.
I just kind of have a question for Mr. Sewell, and maybe he can answer this, maybe he can't, but what is the best outcome for this property, do you think? What will people be satisfied with? What's an appropriate compromise? Because I think last time was it 17 units that was proposed, and then you thought 14 was better or 13 was better? Am I doing that?
Do you want me to answer now, or are you finished?
No, no, please answer.
Okay, and thank you for asking the question. And sorry, Mr. Chair, I just jumping right in there to answer, but and I guess I can lower my hand now too. So last time, 10 units were proposed, and the neighborhood felt that the VLDR zone was a more appropriate zone, because even with 10, you had some internal units that weren't facing the street and things like that. And the feeling was that at 7, it would be a good compromise. You could definitely have some twin homes there, maybe a single family home on the end, or some combination of twin homes and single family homes. There'd be plenty of room. It could be a smooth transition to the neighborhood. And that's what I think most people were hoping for. And I do believe there are some in the neighborhood who would still prefer to, keep the whole thing single family, but R110. But I believe the very solid majority would be very happy with a VLDR rezone that wasn't all weighted on the east side. And if I could just make one more comment related to that, I really think it's unrealistic, very unrealistic, to assume that that west piece won't redevelop with more units if we were to prove this. Go so far as to say it's all but inevitable. And again, that's not without attributing motives or anything like that. I agree with Mr. Hanley's comment there. Even if we, as the current council in our current memory, decided not to allow that, a few years down the road, some new councilors, I just don't see any way an LDR rezone gets turned down there. You've got an LDR density right in the middle in between, and why couldn't you put a similar density closer to University Avenue? It just, to me, it wouldn't make any sense for a council to turn that down, except unless it was just for the reason of people who remembered this conversation, and those memories won't last long.
Councilor Ellsworth, did you have any follow-up to that or other questions?
No, that's helpful.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Mr. Hoban.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I think I get what Councilor Sewell's saying, that long term, ultimately we're going to end up with more units there than we agreed to or we wanted. So if somebody could just clarify for me, if we rezone this and let's say worst case scenario, the plan changes and then down the road another council agrees to add more units, how many units could we end up with on this entire property in its entirety?
Councilor Shipley, you want me to address that?
You're right.
So if this zone was approved, the most they could have is 7. And to the future question, Mr. Hoban, it really depends what the next zone request would be. It really would depend on that. So it's hard to answer.
If it was an LDR zone, if the whole thing got rezoned in the future to LDR, then it could be 12 on this site. That's probably the most likely alternative zone. But this just feels correct. Who knows what a future council may do? We just don't know.
Yeah, and it's, whatever we do is not binding anyways.
Right.
So I guess the question is, would we be comfortable with 12 units there potentially. If not, then we should take steps now to do what we can to ensure that it ends up with as many, the number of units that we would be comfortable with. If that's, 7 or whatever it might be. And how we get there, I'm not sure if that's a development agreement or if we split the property, or, something, but that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. If that feels like too many for that property, then we should probably take steps now before approving it. I don't want to deny it. But I also think if we're not comfortable with 12 units, we shouldn't approve it either. So maybe it's working on development agreement. I don't know.
Mr. Harding?
Just thinking through what Councilor Hoban just said. I don't know. I still kind of disagree. I mean, honestly, looking at it from the perspective of what is the right zone for this plot, I was comfortable with LDR, and I felt like the VLDR was the compromise. And if that's the decision that the council, wants to go with, I can support that. But to me, that's the decision that we're saying 7 units is the maximum that we feel should be here. And I see that as a decision that, that has some life to it. I really encourage this council and all councils to have some deference to past decisions. And now, again, I in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, I really don't think there should be this expectation that what you saw 30 years ago is what you're entitled to 30 years later. But as far as, in 3 or 4 or 8 years, the current house being taken down and then rezoned more densely, the only way I see that happening is if a council really disagreed with the decision that we're making here tonight. And if that's the case, that the council, if both parts of the party want out of the development agreement because they think it was a mistake, there's nothing that we can do to stop that either. So I guess I'm struggling to see how, if we decide to zone it VLDR now, that we shouldn't do that unless we're comfortable with 12, because I guess I have more faith in this council or a future council that they would give some deference to the decision that we made 2 months ago not to zone it LDR, and the decision tonight, if we were to go forward, to zone it LDR. I think VLDR. I would hope that we or a future council would respect the process that got us to that decision tonight.
Thank you. I think what I'm hearing from the majority of the council is that we are accepting of the VLDR for this property. It's just the terms at which we approve the VLDR. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at, and really am trying to gather from the council at this point is, do we continue this to give time for a neighborhood to meet with the applicant and have that potential? Or do we vote this down and just reconsider it in the future based on, waiting for that to happen? My preference personally, because I felt like last time we met and discussed and hashed this out, was that we agreed that a VLDR is right for this property, that we already in practice agreed to the zone change. My preference would be to continue this and give it some time, a fixed time frame to come back and then vote once the neighborhood and the applicant have met. Not that they're going to perfectly agree on this, but just give that opportunity, give that a chance. Also, I think it gives the opportunity for the applicant, to maybe understand that a concept plan that covers more of the property is what the council has been speaking to tonight. At least I hear that from a segment of the council. And so please help me if I'm saying something wrong. We're approaching 9 o'clock. There's a jazz game. So let's see what we can do to move this along. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, let me just address that and maybe give you another option, because I get the sense, and some of this is speculation on my part, but I get the sense that one of the things the council is struggling with is there's not a majority that wants to approve it, but there's a lot of hesitation about just shooting it down because of some of the things that you just said about the applicability of the zone. But there's not really a desire for anybody to pull the trigger on saying, I want to continue this for 2 weeks with no assurance that any conversations will actually take place. And 2 weeks from now, you'll just be having another meeting that mirrors tonight's meeting, as enjoyable as that's been. So let me just suggest that there is at least one other possible option, which is that someone could make a motion rather than just triggering the rule for automatic continuance. Someone could make a motion to postpone this item indefinitely. That essentially tables the item, takes it off of your agenda, and puts it to the side. It's a way that many things actually get defeated. In essence, the item is dead until somebody brings it back. But if conversations take place that convince, for example, 2 counselors that there's a reason to talk about this again, those 2 counselors could come to leadership and say, we're at least ready to sponsor putting this back on the agenda. Will you please put it back on so we can discuss what's changed in the meantime? And that way you're not obligated to have the conversation again, even if no conversations between the developer and the neighborhood take place. But you have given the opportunity for that to happen.
Thank you. Let's go to Councilors Ellsworth first, then Fillmore, then Sewell, please.
Yeah, to Mr. Jones's point, is there another alternative where we could approve this conditionally? Like we can approve the VLDR? No, we can't.
I mean, we could do some type of, I just don't see a way forward in this particular instance. We have done that before in this case. We've had somebody come forward and propose something that you actually like, but your concern is that it will change. And so you say, we'll approve it conditional on a development agreement that guarantees that what we were shown is going to be built. And then the effective date of the zone change is delayed until that development agreement is signed. But what I'm hearing is that what you actually kind of want is we approve this contingent on a development agreement being proffered that offers something completely different than what we see now and that we like. And I don't know how to get your approval on the fact that you like it without bringing it back to you, in which case we haven't really short-circuited anything.
Does the site plan go back to the Planning Commission for approval if we approve the zone?
I'm not sure about that.
For the project plan, it would.
So if we approve the VLDR and the developer creates a new site plan or the current site plan, it goes back to the Planning Commission. It has a public hearing. The citizens can comment. The planning commissioners can say, we like this, we don't like that, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an alternative. Is that correct?
Well, they can say that, but at the end of the day, as long as the site plan complies with the zone, they're obligated to approve it, even if they don't like it.
Right. Okay. Right. But that is a form of a public hearing.
Yes.
Yeah. And there is no guarantee in a neighborhood meeting that the developer will make any concessions or comply or remove a lot or any of those ideas either. So it might be expedited if it were just approved tonight and then the site plan goes through a planning commission hearing and the citizens can voice their concerns there. Previously I was looking at the wrong documents. I was looking at the documents from October and I was saying this is just 10 lots, but this is indeed actually only 6 lots. And I just can't find a good reason to object to 6 families moving into 6 nice homes in this part of Provo. So I'm inclined to approve it tonight. I've been working with the state legislature on this accessory dwelling unit bill, and the legislator that's pushing it says The city councils aren't looking out for people who are going to move into town. They're only looking out for people who currently live in town. And I push back and I say, no, we are trying to look out for people who are going to move into town. This is one of those instances where I think it's perfectly worthwhile and appropriate and necessary to consider 6 families that will move into these 6 homes.
Mr. Fillmore?
As I indicated earlier, Mr. Shipley, I'm inclined to allow the parties to buy some time and see if something could be worked out. That's certainly my preference, but only if both sides are willing. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time. I haven't heard an expression from either side with respect to that possibility. Mr. LaFontaine is interested in that, and Mr. Rosen, perhaps speaking for the neighborhood, were to express some interest in trying to find some fair and reasonable compromise that represented a rough win-win result. And by all means, we'd want to give them time to do that, but I haven't heard that yet.
Mr. Sewell?
I think the cleanest way to handle this would be to deny it. And then there would be 2 options of ways that it could come back, which I would support. The preference would be, after the normal process with the neighborhood meeting, that we get a VLDR proposal for the whole property that has, that's more spread out. The other option that it could work, would be my second choice, is to have this proposal come back with a rezone just for the eastern portion that is actually going to be developed. And if we zone that VLDR, that would give some protection on the maximum number of units that could end up on both halves, even if the western half ended up LDR down the road.
Mr. Hanley?
I'll be really fast. I was just thinking, I was liking Brian Jones' proposal of indefinite postponement. Maybe it's a slight difference between denial at this point. But I would be inclined to do that because that sort of sends the signal that we want the conversation to happen and that we're open to it coming back. That would be my motion.
I'll second that.
So there's a motion to indefinitely postpone this ordinance. Is that correct? Has been seconded. So discussion. Mr. Harding.
I'm just trying to get to my raise hand button. That would be my second preference. My first preference is if there's sufficient confidence on the council that VLDR is the right zone for this area. I'd like to vote on that tonight. I guess I'm a lousy estimator of where people are at on, well, at least some people are at on this, and so I guess I would want to first vote on whether we approve it, and then maybe Brian, if you can, Mr. Jones, if you can help me with this, but I'd love to see if there's sufficient support to approve it tonight, and then if not, then to continue it indefinitely.
Well, I think the cleanest way to do that without kind of running into a procedural issue is for you to just take a straw poll, because if you actually vote on the implied motion and it fails, then it's over. So, I mean, if you want to say that your concern is if there's enough support to approve it without continuing it, that you'd like everybody to go around and say whether they would vote for it before there's a vote on the motion, then you can certainly ask for that.
Can I just say this? I've been taking some notes. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only 2 that would vote in favor of the VLDR tonight without any restriction or without any delay would be Councilors Harding and Councilor Ellsworth. Am I incorrect in that? So I don't know that we need a straw poll. I don't think that it would pass if we went to a vote right now. And so I think either the indefinite, postponement that we're now discussing, or, somebody, I mean, we could still say no to that and still just, continue this, right? So there's still a couple options on the table, but what we're evaluating at this point is whether or not we should indefinitely postpone.
So, Mr. Shipley, I think you perfectly executed what I was hoping would happen. Got me the information that I was hoping for, and so I'm happy to support the motion that's on the table.
Mr. Hoban?
If we indefinitely postpone it, what has to happen to get this back on the docket? Because I don't want to leave the developer hanging forever, indefinitely either. So what would that take?
Well, like I said, in the regular, what people hate it when I use the word scheme, but in the regular scheme of things, postponing indefinitely is often used to kill things and actually just to deny things. So if you postpone indefinitely, there is no guarantee that it will ever come back. But under the council rules, if any two council members approach leadership and say they want it to come back, then it should be scheduled. So what my proposal was, is this gives you an opportunity to, if no changes are ever proposed, you can just consider it dead and it never comes back. If changes are proposed that at least two council members want to have a discussion about, they can approach leadership and get it back on the schedule at any time.
Is that Councilor Hoban? Any follow-up to that?
Are there two council members that feel passionately enough about this that if some changes were made, they would intentionally bring this back? If not, then I would just say let's. I just pull the one-time postponement card or continuance card so that we ensure that it comes back. So I guess
what I would commit to that, Councilor Hoban, is that I would move to bring it back, or try to recruit somebody to bring it back within even just a month. If I think these two parties have to meet in good faith and have a discussion and do it sooner than later. And then I think we've got to just, bring it back and have an opportunity, because I am supportive of the VLDR. And so I don't want to see this thing die, and not ever look at it again. I just don't want to give a certain timetable, a continuance for 2 weeks, for example, and not allow for these two parties to meet in good faith.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, then I support the motion then.
Mr. Hanley?
I'm sorry, I just was trying to interject really quickly that I would support bringing it back if that conversation happened.
Mr. Sewell?
Just a procedural clarification. So it takes two counselors to bring it back to a work meeting, and then it would take 4 to advance it to a subsequent public meeting. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Or the council chair can actually just schedule it and could schedule it directly for the evening.
And add my name to the list, by the way, of people who would be willing to bring this back if we get some kind of resolution between the applicant and the neighborhood on a VLDR proposal. I think that would be wonderful.
And just quickly, I'm not confident, just based on the comments tonight from the neighborhood, that they can come to a perfect solution. I just don't know that I'm confident in that, but I do think, as a matter of principle, having them meet in good faith and discuss, maybe gets us closer to a development agreement or something, that we can then vote on. I just don't think we're ready to vote on it and approve it. So I'd like to see it again. Any other comments? Okay, let's go ahead and vote on the motion to indefinitely postpone. So I'll call for a vote. Chair Sewell?
Yes.
And I, David Shipley, vote yes. Councilor Ellsworth?
Yes.
Councilor Fillmore?
Yes.
Councilor Hoban?
Yes.
Councilor Hanley?
Yes.
Councilor Harding?
Yes.
Okay, it's unanimous. do we need to vote again on something as it pertains to this implied motion, Brian, or is
Nope.
that?
Nope, you're done.
Okay. Thank you. So the other two items for the evening have been continued. So if there's no objection, we'll now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting by unanimous consent, unless someone has an objection. So thank you. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you all for your participation too with the attendees. Have a good night.
Thanks, Dave.